I think either way, we would still be meeting our evidentiary burden for purposes of...
I don't know what I think for sure until I look a little more carefully, but something to look at anyway, certainly. And the other question I have here is, what if the school revokes approval of an institution? Wouldn't you need the same sort of procedure?
The Bureau revokes approval?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, closure, one of the reasons people close is that they're revoked. So they would just have to include that explanation in the teach-out plan. So closure means cease operations under the law. So it could be for any reason, because of revocation, because of, a voluntary decision to just not operate anymore. And I think this regulation's fluid and flexible enough to address those types of situations.
So you only separated out suspended because it may just be programs that are suspended. That's why you separated.
I mean, what we're looking at the top is the original Reform Act had a broader definition for what closure meant, and it included discontinuation of programs in general. But when the law changed, the teach-out plan requirement was tied to ceasing operations or a suspension imposed by the Bureau. So the reason the changes are made at the beginning is to reflect that it's going to be a closure of an institution, which includes its branch or satellite locations, or a suspension imposed due to the requirements in 94885.5. But it certainly would cover any type of closure, whether it's because of an administrative or disciplinary action or because of the decision of the institution to no longer operate.
And then I guess the other question I have based on that is, I don't remember whether the statute is written specifically or to allow the Bureau to go beyond what the statute says, because if there are programs closing, not because of suspension, but otherwise, would it be helpful for the Bureau that there be a teach-out plan? And if so, is that something the statute allows the Bureau to require or not?
No, that's what I was mentioning, that the prior Reform Act did, the definition of closure was actually in the STRIF, Student Tuition Recovery Fund statute. And so they had tied closure to STRIF eligibility specifically and had a more expansive definition of closure. But when the law was rewritten, the definition of closure was changed to actually indicate for teach-outs that it's only when the institution ceases operation. So because it's narrowed it to just when the institution ceases operations, the only time the programmatic teach-out would be required would be when that suspension I mentioned pursuant to 94885.5 occurs. So that's the only situation where a teach-out's required. If the institution decides not to offer a program on their own, there's no teach-out required, but there's certainly other student protection elements that have to be met, like refunds, and that the students that aren't refunded would still be eligible for STRIF. So, but like I said, the definition of closure is for teach-outs is only for ceasing operations and for discontinuing of educational programs under 94885.5.
So I think that raises a question, maybe for a future discussion, whether the Bureau thinks it would be helpful if that statute were changed so that it could cover teach-outs when there's program closures.
Correct.
So that's something maybe we should look at in the future, maybe an additional agenda item in the future.
Okay.
I think the reason, if I remember correctly, hearkening back to 2010, when Sarah and I were talking to each other every day about nothing, was that they were trying to align the closure and teach-out language to the Department of Ed's language, which is ceasing operations, not stopping a program. Where I understand what Margaret's getting at, I think there is a difference between there's a difference between a school saying, this program is just not working for us, so we're going to stop teaching it. And usually they don't just stop. They'll stop enrolling students and finish it up. But there's a huge difference between we're going to phase this program out or having a program suspended, which is what we're trying to address here, and ceasing operation, which is the sort of the ultimate situation. So I'm open to discussing that in the, at some point, but I think that it was written specifically to try to align the STRIF with the teach-out requirements under the accreditors and under the Department of Ed, which all are based on ceasing operations completely. So, okay. So with that said, a quick question about the ownership sorry, don't want to harp on this, but I'm thinking about all the other applications that are submitted to the Bureau for various reasons. And it seems like usually the signatory is the CEO, especially with Margaret's example of a publicly traded company where it's a corporation that could have thousands of owners, is the CEO. Would you consider the CEO to be an authorized person for purposes of something like this?
I would think that would qualify. I think when we're writing regulations, we try to make them as performance-based as possible, because if you specifically state a specific officer, then it's
Right.
prescriptive, and those
Right.
are harder to get through the Office of Administrative Law. If there's a way to comply that meets the Bureau's laws and needs from an evidentiary perspective, I'd recommend keeping it open, more an open decision for the institution to determine, because if they've authorized it, they're legally bound by it. So I don't know that you'd want to ever say it has to be signed by the CEO or it has to be signed by the CFO or whatever. So keeping it open, and also keeping it flexible for the different types of entities that you license, LLCs, sole ownerships, partnerships, those types of entities, they can all decide which type of individual is authorized to submit on their behalf. And I think that would meet your evidentiary requirements for enforcement of the laws.
So would saying at least 30 days prior to closing an owner or authorized person?
I would say an authorized owner, because you want someone that's actually owning the license. I believe it has an ownership interest in the license because it's their license that's affected by compliance with this law. And I've been in too many situations with other clients where they say, well, I didn't tell my office manager to submit that, so it's not authorized. But if it's one of the owners, it's harder to argue that they didn't authorize it.
Yeah, the only reason why I bring that up is because when you have a publicly traded company or something that has a very diverse ownership structure, that even what is an authorized owner at that point is still kind of difficult to, I think, to assign. So
Well,
if they authorize or designate an officer or something like that, to me, that seems like it would cover more than an authorized owner, which they may not have someone who's designated as an authorized owner.
Well, they don't have to designate it for all times, it's just for this plan. So I would think that the company would be able to determine who they want to select. And I think what we're trying to do is just reflect that somebody that has an ownership interest would necessarily need to be involved in the decision-making process. And it's easier for us to defend taking any kind of administrative action we need to take if someone that owns the license signed off on the closure plan. So I just think it's more legally defensible for an owner to actually be responsible for it. And that's, I believe, what the school closure form that the Bureau currently uses, it's voluntary, says. It says owner.
Okay.
So I was just trying to reflect the Bureau's past interpretation and practice in the regulations so we can have a mandatory requirement. But if there's another way to say it, I'm certainly open to it. But I think typically for my clients, saying it's an authorized owner covers us.
Okay, so one other question on that first paragraph, which is, for suspended institutions, the owner will provide a closure plan for its programs in writing at least 30 days prior to the effective date of the Bureau's suspension.
Right.
So would the Bureau, how much notice is the Bureau giving the institution that a suspension is forthcoming?
My understanding was that was the close. Is Beth Scott here? Sorry, Beth, to call you out, but I thought you said 60 days. Was that right? Or I'm trying to recall what you told. We talked about this. It's an enforcement. So who is your enforcement?
So the reason I ask is because if you're saying you're going to be suspended in 30 days, then obviously the school.
Well, yeah, you'd want it.
time.
Yeah, you'd want the notice of suspension to be longer than that, I agree, and I thought it was greater than 30 days.
Okay.
But we can take a look at that, and I'll confirm with
Okay.
Yvette Johnson that they get more, and if it's 30 days, then we'll have to lower that number, probably.
Right.
I mean,
and-
increase that number, maybe.
Right, exactly, so that the notice gives the school
More
sufficient time
time.
to put together the plan, get all the information
Before the
together.
effective
Right.
date of the suspension.
Or it
So we'll
could be-
take a look at that.
Or it could be done as so many days after they receive notice of the suspension, would be another way to
right.
go about it.
Sure.
Any other questions on section A before we move on? Okay. So going to A1, for institutions that intend to cease operations, the exact date and reason for the closure. I think that was just to clarify that this is not for the suspended.
Right, they know why they're closing the
Right,
program.
Ceasing operations is, you should know why at that point.
Yeah.
The closure plan will also include the name, title, address, telephone number, and email address for an individual designated by the institution as the contact person for school closure information requests by the Bureau. So I assume that is not the owner, that is whoever the designee
Right.
is that will be handling.
That's the person that's going to field all the calls from the Bureau and help coordinate any issues they need to help wind down operations.
One issue that comes up is when schools close, although they had an agent for service of process, often it's the same person that's been running the school. And when the school closes, they sort of disappear from the scene. And I'm wondering if it would be useful here to have them also provide you with confirm who the current agent for service of process is and who it will be after the school is closed, at least to give, so they give some thought to that fact. It still may not make sure that that person is around.
Okay, well, we'll speak with staff about that.
Any other notes on number 2? Okay. No change to 3, which says that, which is, well, it was 2, it's now 3. The last date of instruction of each educational service or program, which I would assume at the point at which you are either being suspended or have chosen or are otherwise ceasing operations, that you'll have a last date
Right.
based on when you know it's happening. Margaret, do you have a question on that one? Okay. For Romanet 1, a list of students who were enrolled at the time during the 120 days prior to closure. So, and then it provides the list of the information that you need to provide for the student. So on that one, when you're saying 120 days prior to closure, is that limited to ceasing operations, or is that including suspension of programs?
It's students enrolled at time of closure, and for the person, the institution that's suspended, it would be all the students that are affected by that suspension within 120 days prior to suspension.
So would it make sense to say during the 120 days prior to ceasing operations or discontinuing a program, so that it's
Okay.
clear that it's, the date would be, if you're ending a program, what the end date of the program is versus, or and backing up 120 days versus a closure, which is a different.
So it should say prior to closure or prior to the effective date of a suspension, because it's a suspension of the educational program.
Right.
Okay.
As defined, the suspension is for educational programs, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have anything else on that one. Go ahead.
Yeah. I thought I just heard you say that they had to have been enrolled at the time of the closure? You didn't say that, right? I misunderstood.
No.
Okay, great. So they were enrolled at any time within that 120 days?
Right.
And then they left, and then later the school closed?
Because
fine.
we're trying to, OSAR's concern was that 60 days was, again, a holdover from the prior Reform
Right.
Act. It was 60 days,
Right.
and then it changed to 120 for STRIF eligibility.
A couple of things. I think it might be useful, and I would defer to staff on this, but I would think in trying to determine then their eligibility or the amount of their eligibility, it might be helpful to have the student start date and the date the student left the school included in the information that you seek.
Well, that is in
That's
the
in-
list. We've added that, this new language we have here.
I'm
we're
sorry, I don't see that.
Scheduled, It says program
Well,
start
the
date.
program start date, does that mean that individual, the date that individual started?
Yes.
Right.
To me, that's not clear because sometimes programs start and then students are added in later.
Well, it's each student's program start date. So each student's and then everything else after that.
Each student's
is-
program start date, I see. And then the date that they left the program?
Scheduled completion date and refund, enrollment status. So we asked for enrollment status, whether they're currently enrolled, graduated, withdrawn, or on a leave of absence. So we asked for each student's status.
Right,
in
but their
addition to
status might-
completion, scheduled completion date.
Right. Their status might be that they're no longer enrolled, but you wouldn't know what the date was that they left. That's what I'm saying. It might be helpful to have the date, the period of time, beginning and end when they were in that program. That's what I'm suggesting. Not
Especially if you're trying to measure the 120 days, right?
120 days or the amount of economic loss or all kinds of things. You might want to know the date they were last there.
I would suggest last date of attendance would be
Okay.
the commonly used term.
Thank you.
And the other question I have is, because the Bureau is able to provide STRIF to students enrolled more than 120 days before, but who were left, if there was a significant decline in the educational program, I wonder if you thought about how you would pick up that information. And I don't know that there is a good way to do that, but that may be something you might want to think about, how to pick up that
I
information.
can speak to that. That was brought up and discussed. The problem becomes, as a regulatory matter, the longer period that you keep going out, the more difficult and more burdensome it becomes. Yes, the Bureau obviously has the ability through STRIF to, its discretion to say that the quality of education declined before then, and the Bureau has, but for regulatory purpose of gaining the information, it was discussed, but it was decided the 120 days wouldn't be too burdensome, would be in line. And yes, if there was an issue, that information would have to be recovered, but
So let me just explain. The reason why the discontinuation of program and the quality of decline is not in here is because this is on teach-out requirements. So the teach-out requirements relate to closure. And so what we're looking at is students affected by closure. And so we're looking back to 120 days because the original law linked adverse effects to the students to a certain time frame, and it was 60 days prior to closure. The law then changed to 120 days prior to closure. So the legislature decided how far back we go with respect to teach-out plans. Now, that doesn't mean that the STRIF eligibility requirements are changed and that people that are affected by discontinuation of program or people who are affected because of the quality of education still can't make a claim. But this regulation is focused exclusively on teach-out requirements, and so I think would have a hard time proving to OAL that we're not expanding the scope of the statute beyond ceasing operations and the focus on how that affects students in terms of ceasing operations. That's the trigger for teach out. And again, we go back to the closure definition being more restrictive than the prior law. And that's why we're only having the schools focus on the 120 days prior to closure when dealing with teach out plans. So that doesn't mean that we can't have another regulation that deals with investigating the decline in quality of education. And you still have subpoena power and all that to collect information, to investigate those allegations, to determine whether there was a decline. But that's separate from the teach-out requirements.
Right. What I think you could do, which would be helpful, is let's say that you have a school that you have been looking at, but it continues to operate for 180 days or 200 days, but you've been looking at the school and it's been in problems for a longer time. You might be able to write this regulation that it says 120 days prior to closure, or such longer date as the Bureau designates when it determines that it needs to look at that. I mean, I don't know the specific language, but you could just have it flexible, give the Bureau some flexibility there. And the other thing on this is it says 120 days prior to closure, and I understand this is in the teach-out,
Right.
but this is where you're getting the information that also is going to be used or helpful for STRIF, is from this information you're gathering from the school, right?
Some
And-
of it, yes.
And STRIF, the 120 days is before a location or a program as well as the entire school.
Right.
So, and again, you may, if they're closing the location, I don't know that you can require a teach-out plan if they're closing the location, can you?
I do. My
Okay.
argument is that the definition in the statute is ceasing operations of an institution, and the institution is defined as a branch or satellite location.
Okay.
Including that.
All right, so then here, it probably should have added prior to closure of the institution or the location.
Well, I have that at the top, so it's clear from the introduction that it says closing an institution or location of an institution, or prior to the effective date of a suspension. So I'm trying to keep it as less wordy as possible, because the more words we add in there, the more confusing, and we have to meet a clarity standard. So I think it's a given.
Gotcha, I see. Okay, and then as far as program, if it can't be put in here, maybe we ought to think about if that could be put in somewhere else, so that you could get that information 120 days at
Right.
least before a program closes.
Right, I don't think this
Yeah.
would prohibit
I
you from going in a different direction in another regulation. Yes.
I have a quick question. What's the purpose of the inclusion of graduates in the 120-day window? Says section I under 3 includes enrolled, graduated, withdrawn, or on a leave of absence.
This-
Obviously, the enrolled, withdrawns, and leave of absence, I understand the impact, but somebody who graduated within 120 days and then the school closed post-graduation.
Right, so I don't know, this was a request from, did OSAR, or was that? What I was concerned with is what enrollment status meant and what we needed that for, and so I asked for clarification on what enrollment status meant. So perhaps it's just to distinguish people who have graduated from those who have not, and who may be eligible for STRIF and who may not.
Okay, interesting. I see.
So I think it's important to get the complete picture.
Because the
of-
transcripts are required elsewhere, and so I was just curious
Right.
why include them there as well.
Right, so, I mean, if they've graduated and they haven't suffered an economic loss, and we get a STRIF application, that may be
Sure.
something that the
Quick way
Bureau
to
would be
disaggregate.
interested.
Yeah, I got it. Okay.
So unless Office of Student Assistance and Relief has a different take. All the universe, okay.
The other question, or other issue there, I think, is, according to the statute, I'm not certain that if someone graduates before the closure, but in fact, there was a significant decline, and I mean, I'm sorry, if they were enrolled in that 120 days, even if they graduated, I'm not sure that they're excluded from the STRIP.
I agree with you. I just think that we want to know
Right.
where they are in their educational process. Maybe they would be included, maybe they would be excluded. It's hard to know, but I think what we're looking at is to make sure, again, that you have a complete picture of who is affected by the closure, so you're able to have that information going forward.
Yeah, it's more so to help us identify and be clear on the students that we're helping.
Especially when the cross-reference is going to be the STRIF quarterly reporting, which is going to be students at the time of enrollment. So this gives you a sense of where the students are at the time that the program or the school closes. So you're basically getting the information twice. This just tells you where the student was at the time. Yeah.
Right.
And I just realized as we were talking that the question I had about the 120 days prior to closure is actually addressed in Romanet 2, which is for institutions subject to suspension. Sorry about that. So I think we actually already
Okay,
are
so-
covering that in the next
Okay, so I don't
paragraph.
need to add that, okay. Thank you. It's been a while since I looked at this, so, thank you.
So any comments on Romanet 2? None? Good?
Okay.
I think I need clarification. I'm sorry. So someone who is in a school that is closed because of suspension,
Right.
where did you just say it's in, that you would get the information for them from 120 days prior?
The statute says the teach out is for currently enrolled students. So that's why, we're separating the schools that are closing, branches or satellites or entire operations, versus the ones that are subject to suspension, because the statute is applicable to currently enrolled students. So we're not looking back at the 120 for that one. We're looking at currently enrolled students who are affected by that suspension of that particular program, because they automatically qualify for STRIF. You don't have to look back at quality of education, because if they're currently enrolled and the program suspended, they automatically qualify for STRIF. Do you see what I mean?
Moving on to Romanet 3, the list required by this section shall be provided in a legible hard copy or electronic format. I would assume that goes without saying, but.
Well, you'd be surprised what people will send in and say, I complied, here it is.
Here's my
You
handwritten
can't read it,
sticky
but
notes.
okay.
Gotcha. Is any questions on that one? That seems like a no-brainer. Okay. And then moving on, it looks like there's no changes to 5A.
Yeah, that's
B.
existing law, so.
Right.
we don't-
Okay, so moving on to the back of the page, which is
I'm sorry.
Section 6.
Yeah, just one comment on B. I realize the statute says, you have to,
Subdivision B?
subdivision B, 5B.
Oh, 5B.
Yeah,
Yeah, this is straight out of statute, actually.
right. But the statute, I believe, gives the Bureau power to get additional information. My question here is, you have to make arrangements for refunds,
Yes.
or if they participate in the federal student loan, arrangements for refunds. And my question just is about that or instead of and, because a school might have both be in the federal program and have additional monies that they're getting directly or through the school loan. So it seems to me that it would be helpful to say and instead of or, because a school might in fact be subject to both of those.
Well,
The statute,
the statute says and,
the
so we
statute
can't
says,
deviate.
the statute says or, but I believe
says
it also,
and. I'm sorry, it says and, or the institutions for making refunds and returning federal student financial aid program funds. It says and in 94926.
So if you look, it has the arrangements for making refunds within 45 days, or for institutions that participate in federal aid for making refunds and returning federal funds.
Yeah,
So you're
yeah.
doing both
I'm,
in the second part of
Yeah,
that.
you have to do both.
You're doing both refunds and return.
for
of
making
Title IV.
refunds and returning
Yes, they have to refund and return the funds to the feds.
under the federal program.
Right,
Yes.
but refunds to the student and return to Title IV if there
Yes.
are funds that have to go back. Because so it's combining both into that second
For
clause.
making
Right.
refunds and returning. Okay, if you think that covers it. I didn't think it was clear, but maybe so. Okay.
Okay, so moving on to the top of the next page, which is now Section 6, a plan for the disposition of student records. The new language describes, the plan shall describe how the institution will arrange for the maintenance of student records in accordance with Section 94-900 of the Code and 71-920 and 71-930 of the regs, including the retention of student transcripts. The plan will also include the name, address, telephone number, fax number for those who still have fax machines, an email address for the custodian of records or other person responsible for maintaining student records for the institution. So if I'm reading this right, and this is going from memory, the language of the code and the regulations requires that anytime you're conducting a teach out that you have to submit this. So this doesn't seem like anything that's
Right, but I think what wasn't clear was that we had to describe how we were they didn't have to describe how they were going to comply with these
Okay.
statutes and regulations. It just says a plan. So my plan could be, I'm throwing it in my backyard garbage can. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it shouldn't be, but I think if we're going to ask them, what's your plan? How do you how does your plan comply
Comply
with
with.
these requirements? That's an additional regulatory requirement, and that is something that the closed school unit does want to ask them. So that's why I've included it. I mean, we could put fax number, if any,
It's fine to have it in there because,
I mean,
no one's gonna.
but that
it'll be a
is on the
blank.
current closed school form. Again, I was trying to capture all of that.
There is a comma missing between telephone number and facsimile number.
Oh, thank you.
If,
Yes.
if we're gonna leave that fax number in there.
No, okay.
One thing I would suggest adding is, in reality, a lot of times this just doesn't happen once the school closes because things fall apart. And I wonder if it'd be worth asking, as part of the plan, whether they provide you the information about the financial arrangements for ensuring that the custodian of records will be able to maintain them. So there should be, I presume, I don't know how specific you want to get. You might want to have something showing they've been paid in advance, or there's, some kind of a contract or money available, but I would think you would want to know it isn't just some name they're giving you with no basis
Yeah.
that that person's really going to be able to do it.
I don't know, we could explore seeing whether the plan includes provision of payment to ensure that the records are maintained. We could try that, adding that. It might be a little bit beyond the scope, but we could try to argue that,
If I
basically,
may,
what's your,
this is actually going to come up in the next regulation.
for it.
It's going to come up in the next package in item 8.
Okay.
Because there is a specific provision in 71930 regarding it, and so.
okay, so maybe it's covered because we refer to it in this
Right.
regulation.
Yeah,
Okay.
and you've already referred to the section
Right.
through the listing up here.
Okay, thank you, Kent.
Thanks, Kent. Any other? We'll cross-reference that when we get to it. What is now 6? Or should we move on to what should be 7 and still says 6?
Yeah, sorry. Thank you.
Yes, it should be 7 right there listed on my notes.
Under 7, a plan to notify students of their rights and options under the Act in this chapter, along with a copy or draft of any document the institution proposes to use to notify students of the institution's pending suspension or closure and their rights and options under the Act. Which, from my experience, having helped some schools with closures and program ends, that was already requested most of the time anyway.
Well, I just want to standardize it because it is requested, but we would like to mandate it. And part of the reason, obviously, is to make sure that what's being conveyed to the students is accurate.
I'm wondering, and again, this is probably not part of the regulation, but whether BPPE might draft a sample document for the use of schools, because you do want to make sure this is legible, that it's simple, that it's written in big enough type, and that it does include, some of the important information. I don't know how much detail you want to have here. It just says, provide them something. Which is pretty hard to enforce without more detail. So that would be a question of whether maybe the detail should be here and/or sort of a sample that if they do something like this, that's kind of almost like a safe harbor if it's good enough, one way or the other.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, my thought on that would be it's fine to have sort of general outline of what you expect, but obviously every institution's situation might be slightly different, so it can't be just a form.
Right.
It has to be something that the school can adjust, especially if you have situations where a program is suspended, but at another, a closure where it's a branch closing and there's a main nearby and students are being provided, here's some travel stipends so that you can go to the other camp, whatever, there's always going to be a bunch of conditional things that'll be in there. So just not to be too prescriptive, I guess.
Right.
Okay, I think that covers all of these proposed changes for that regulatory section.
Well, while we're looking at this regulatory section, though, I would have the same comment about B1. I think it'd be helpful to have a little more specificity there of what it is you expect them to provide. For example, their rights for closed school discharge, some of the important rights that OSAR would be giving them if they knew enough to go to OSAR to get that kind of help, but just give them some information So I'd include some more specificity there. And in B2, providing information regarding the student tuition recovery fund, I would think it would be helpful to say there, and a copy of the STRIF application and instructions for filling it out, or, OSAR's cover sheet, something along those lines, so it's not just, oh, there's a STRIF fund, but in fact, here's the form, here's the instructions, here's the office that can help you fill it out.
Yeah, now that the OSAR is in statute, we can sprinkle them around a little more.
With respect to OSAR, would it be okay to maybe just indicate that they have to provide the contact information for OSAR? Because I'm worried about the instruction sheet in being included in the regulation, because we'd have to then justify that sheet in regulation. So would it be appropriate to say that the school should provide the Office of Student Assistance Relief's contact information, and I would ask Scott, maybe the mission statement or the description from the statute?
I would think if,
Yeah, it's just getting the information to the student to contact OSAR that we,
I think it depends on how much information it is. If it's just there's an office that can help students, here's their number, I don't think it's going to be nearly as effective as if you say, there's a student tuition recovery fund, which may entitle you to get all of your money back if you didn't finish the program. Give them some more information, at least, if you don't give them the form. Because otherwise, contact this office, they may be able to help you. It doesn't cut it these days. I mean, maybe even prescribe some FAQs, but something so that they're really understanding you really may have some money coming to you. You ought to look into this.
okay.
I'll leave that to you guys, because I think you start to get a little complicated at some point, but I think the referring them to OSAR is, at this point, an entire unit that's sort of committed to helping students with this. And also the STRIF language is in the catalog, it's in the enrollment agreement, so it might be that you could just reference, as described, somewhere, so you don't have to, because the language of STRIF is long. So including that in the regulation might get a little cumbersome.
Yeah, I'm not
I understand.
suggesting including the whole language, because that's, you want short, simple, straightforward information, and if possible, here's the form if you want to use it.
Maybe we could include the website link for the STRIF application.
That's what I was thinking, because then that way
Because
if it
the app,
changes.
that would make it a kind of a lengthy letter.
Let us take that back and look into it.
Okay. Mina, do we need to do comment between the two? Okay. Does anyone have any comments or concerns about the language of 76-240, required notices and teach-out plan? Seeing none, moving on. Next up is proposed text for Regulation 71-920, which is student records other than transcripts. Kent, you want to give us a quick overview before we dive in?
Yeah, 71920, this is going to cover actually 4 sections now, 71920, 930, and then we're moving to adopt 940, which is exclusively transcripts, and 71950. This is the basic requirements for the maintenance of records and the procedures around it, and it's a bit dated. So we wanted to update and clarify in areas, and you'll see in places large sections such as near the end of the first page on the 71920, it appears to be deleted starting with the old 5, but actually that's been moved over into 71940. So some of it is also a rearranging to help with the clarity of the different things that we're speaking about. So this one I'll be able to help answer questions as we go through, as I was more directly involved.
I could start by offering some global feedback. I think the section is well-written, comprehensive, consistent with, to the degree possible, with accreditation standards and federal standards. I think it's well done and
Thank you.
good
Yeah,
update.
that was an effort of our group.
Yeah. So there isn't anything in here that's foreign to institutions. Again, it's highly consistent and rigorous in an appropriate way.
Thank you.
Margaret, if you have comments, go ahead. I'm still just
Um,
making sure I got it
Are you
all
going
here.
to go through it one by one, or should I just jump in where I have a comment?
You know, it probably makes sense to just kind of start from the beginning. That way we can do what we did with the last one and make sure we cover everything. Okay, so from the beginning, a couple clarifiers. It looks like records as opposed to all file. This shall maintain all, I guess that was supposed to be files. Record for each student who enrolls and completes the educational program. I assume there's no comment about that. An indication, and in addition to the requirements of 94-900 of the code, the record shall contain all the following student records. And then it just basically goes through and lists them. Passing score on ATB. That makes sense. Yeah. Oh, pff, Kevin disappeared. Okay, we'll take a quick. Let's see. It's 10:38. We can just take 10 minutes, and then that way, if anybody needs to use the bathroom, now's your chance. Back to business. So we were just beginning a quick overview of 71-920, 930, 940, and 950, which includes some moving around of some sections. So I think we had gotten as far as 71-920, like about halfway through that first page. I'm just looking at, I didn't have any comments relating to what's on page 1 here. Does anybody have any notes on 71-920 up through section 5? Nope, okay. So at the top of the next page, and actually the bottom of what was previously section 5, I believe, Ken, you were saying that's the section that was moved to 71-940.
940. Yeah, it has to do with transcripts and all materials revolving around transcripts. We tried to move over into its own section.
Great. Okay, so we'll save that conversation when we get there. Dissertation. I don't have any notes on 71-920. Does anyone? Anything? Go ahead.
71-920, what is that, A12 or B12, whatever that is. I guess it's B12. All written complaints. I think it would be good to have this a little more detailed, so it's clear it includes the written complaints, any documentation provided with the complaints, and any documentation the institution prepared in response to the complaint. So basically the whole complaint file, that they would maintain that.
Okay.
Anything else on this section? Okay. Moving on to 71-930, maintenance of records. Section A, an institution shall maintain all records required by this act, by the act, and this chapter was changed to division. Is Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, there is. The Bureau operates under Division 7.5 in Title 5, whereas the chapter is actually a breakdown within. There's articles and then chapters even within the divisions, and this
Okay.
broadens it to say everything within the entire division of regulations.
Okay. The record shall be maintained in the state at the institution's principal place of business. The new language is records maintained electronically or digitally on a computer system that are immediately available for printing and transmission in the state at the institution's principal place of business, such as email or transfer to a portable storage space, are considered to be maintained in the state. I don't have an issue with that.
I have a question. The records, if they're maintained out of state, I think it would be helpful here to say that an institution which maintains them out of state agrees that they will be subject to service of a California court with respect to those documents, because once they're out of state, if you want the records and they're not providing them, it may be more difficult to get them.
This deals specifically in electronic records.
Right.
And the ambiguity of whether or not something on a server or in the cloud is within the state of California for purposes of the statute, which require that the records be maintained at the principal place of business in this state. And this is clarifying that something that can be accessed electronically in the state at the principal place of business is considered to be in the state.
Right. I'm just saying that I'm not sure that you don't need some additional language saying shall be considered to be maintained in the state. I'm not sure that that gets you, suppose they're electronically elsewhere and you demand them and they're not forthcoming. And so you wind up having to go to court and the court says, I don't have jurisdictions over those records in another state. So I'm just saying to the extent that they are bound by California law and with respect to those records. And I don't know the particular language you might want, but I think you may want to make it clear that they're treated as in this state for legal purposes as well as every other purpose. I don't know what language you might use, but something along those lines.
But 71700 requires them to produce all documents for the Bureau as we request, as needed.
And that might be
Yeah, look into it to see that you think that's sufficient legal authority. If there's any ambiguity at all, I would make sure that you've got, boots and suspenders.
So moving on to 71930B1. The cross out there, Ken, is that just because you moved that to the transcript section as well?
Correct.
The section shall maintain, so this section, so 71930, is just about the maintenance of the records that are included in 71920, correct?
Generally, let me take a quick look.
Because 71920 is now student records other than transcripts, so this is basically anything that you would maintain in a student's record. And then 71930 is referencing the maintenance of those records, correct? And then the transcripts, the language about maintaining transcripts is handled in the section that is now 71940.
Yes, except I would say that C may include transcripts under 71930, but we should look into clarifying that point.
Right. Well, and not to skip around too much, but in the 71940 section, there is language in B that says, in addition to permanently retaining a transcript as described by the section of the code, and then it goes on. So I think you're sort of covering that. Okay. So,
As Christy did point out, it's been a few weeks since we...
yeah, I get it. Okay, so then what is still included in B1 is the institution shall maintain for a period of 5 years the student records described in 71920, which is what we were just talking about, from the student's date of completion, withdrawal, or termination of enrollment. I think that makes sense. The 5-year period for the Department of Ed, or 3-year period is at the end of the award year from when the student left. So 5 years from that is not too far off. Any other notes on that one? Okay. Notwithstanding B1, the institution shall maintain federal student aid records as required by federal law. C, the records, so what was taken out? A record is considered current for 3 years following the student's completion or withdrawal. Might be on microfilm, a microfiche, everyone. Going back to our facsimile earlier, we were, remember the microfiche machine with the crank? God, I'm old. Okay, so we took that piece out for records, whether stored, copy, or shall comply with all the following. Okay, I get it. We're updating ourselves to the 21st century here. I love it. The records, whether stored, electronic, or hard copy, shall comply with all the following requirements. No loss of information. The records are legible. The records are accessible as follows. So I won't read all of this. We'll let anybody who has to comment on this section. My only question on this one, and this is coming from I am just not an IT person, so I don't know what is reasonable from the perspective of what I guess is C3B4 about the frequency of the backup.
Correct.
I don't know if anyone on the panel has, some. I believe when I worked in a school that the backup was done every day, but I'm not sure what's reasonable in this.
That is actually the standard, not only in schools. I've worked with a number of groups during this to help define the electronic side and the IT. Reached out in a number of different areas, plus my own experiences. And I have my own website, and my domain host backs up daily. As it's pretty standard procedure that anything operating today is backed up daily. I will even say my father was in bank data processing and backed up daily with those big tape things you see from the old NASA movies. So weekly is giving a lot of room, because in reality, daily is a pretty basic standard today.
I have a question regarding 3B, and specifically sort of in reference to the opening in 71930A. Personnel trained and able to access provided records. Some institutions operate with learning centers or satellite campuses, for example, that might only on site have a faculty member. And that faculty member would not actually have access to take down those records. You reference principal place of business in 71930A. And so certainly at a main campus or a branch campus, there would be somebody on staff during business hours to access that record. But I could see a circumstance where an institution at every location that instruction is provided may not meet 3B in terms of access to the data.
Okay.
That's actually, it's a good point, Joseph, because if I'm remembering the statute correctly, in the definition of a satellite location, you're specifically not allowed to have records retained there, right? Because otherwise it becomes a branch.
Permanent records.
Right, permanent records, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a good point, especially at a satellite or just a teaching location where the records would be maintained at the principal.
So if it falls, and I defer to the attorneys on this, if it falls under 71930A, then you're probably covered. If it could be interpreted independently, then you should repeat principal place of business.
We could just do it for clarity, too.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have a question about the accessibility of records. And I don't know if this is the place it should be, but what is there that ensures that the student's own records will be accessible to the student within a reasonable amount of time? This all talks about the access for the Bureau or other people authorized under the statute.
Well, student record access would be, for federally funded institutions, would be governed by the school's FERPA policy. But I guess if you're non-Title IV, then you wouldn't necessarily have to comply with that.
Does FERPA extend beyond Title IV?
Well, it's federally funded, so for most institutions, it's Title IV.
Because I know it extends to K through 12 too.
Right, yeah.
I just ask that you take a look at that and see if we don't need something there to ensure that students have access, because I think that's been one of the big issues is students trying unsuccessfully to get transcripts and other documents, whether it's the loan documents the school arranged or information about a complaint they filed, et cetera.
All right. So moving on to the following page, we have an additional section or a new section D that the record or data must be provided in PDF format unless agreed to by the Bureau. And same with the student transcripts must be kept in PDF or in a system that can export data into PDF, which I think in today's world, that's completely sort of the norm, but obviously, who knows if PDF will suddenly stop existing a year from now. So I'm not sure if I guess it's regulations, we can always change it, but PDF, just like our sections about microfiche and facsimiles, PDF is the standard right now, but.
No, it's a very good point. And again, doing the research through right now, every operating system, whether it's Windows or Macintosh, every entity, if you go online to the state government, federal government, everybody is become reliant upon PDF. And in addition, Adobe's gone so far as to make their readers capable of reading PDF. So while it's possible that something could come out and suddenly replace it, this is 25 years plus in the thing. And I did go around because I was worried that there might be others that weren't doing it. And while some may include, say, a rich text format as well, they'll still have a PDF along the line and throughout the entire research. So it is current, but as you do say, things change and have to cross that bridge.
Okay.
It's a good point.
I have a question, and that is, for certain things, the Bureau would want it in some sort of form like Excel, I would assume, so that they could look at different parameters and print out different reports.
Absolutely, and that's why the language was included to say unless another format is either specified or agreed to by the Bureau.
Suppose a school does all its stuff and just puts everything in PDF, and then they don't keep any Excel stuff. And the Bureau says, I want that in Excel. And the school says, I have it in PDF. And now after the fact, you're telling me you want it in some other format. I can't go back and recreate that. So I'm just wondering how you deal with that.
Well,
I think in that situation, we would definitely try to work with the school. And even prior to, we would probably want to request it. If we know we need it in a certain format, we would ask for it. But if they did send everything in PDF, we would obviously try to work with that institution.
Right, it's just, if they don't have it anymore in the original Excel or whatever data program, it's extremely time-consuming and costly to try to recreate it.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, you don't have the resources, and they probably don't have the resources. I'm wondering if there shouldn't be some information here that certain kinds of data needs to be kept in a form like Excel or some kind of a data, standard data form.
I think it's definitely something worth looking into.
Margaret, we'll look into that because it is very prescriptive. And I could see the schools coming back and saying, you regulated this and you said PDF and now you're trying to change
Right,
that.
but most schools, for their own purposes, will put things in some kind of a data spreadsheet, probably Excel. So they're probably already doing it. It's just that at some point, they probably, they may not keep it in that form after a while. They just, have everything changed into PDF. So you're really just saying, hey, keep these certain things in a data sheet, a spreadsheet, so that, we can...
Readily readable or some language like that.
Well, not just readable, but, you may want to look at, different aspects that you can do by creating so-called reports in a data sheet, a spreadsheet. By just asking for, column 1 and 5 or, that kind of thing.
But the breadth and complexity of student records data is not stored in Excel. It's stored in a student information system, which have a variety of data architectures. They can be exported to Excel, but there aren't schools that have more than 50 students, right, that are doing anything in Excel other than maybe throwing data out of a SIS into that. And so I would be careful of, in the same format as PDF, don't refer necessarily to, I actually like what you said in regards to readily available row data, for example, or some reference to that.
So do you think it would be a difficult problem for the schools to comply with exporting to a PDF? They think that's doable in today's technological environment?
Well, anything can be exported to a PDF. It's
Okay.
only that PDF is just a picture of something, right? But if you need to know 5,000 students and what their grades were, how many units, you're not going to get that in a PDF, or you wouldn't use it in that way. You'd have an export, to Margaret's point, in Excel that would come out of a student information system. So a PDF would be relatively limited in terms of how you could use it. So I think Margaret's point is well taken, that if you want to see somebody's transcript, you could get a PDF for that. But if you wanted to know their start and stop times, or the history of their financial aid, or their student ledger account, you're not generally going to get that you could get it in a PDF, but it's just going to be many, many pages.
Right, because with an Excel, especially if you're sending it electronically, right, you can have, a million rows of data, but if you're converting that to a PDF, that million rows of data turns into 16 pages for the first line, and it starts to get a little difficult to read. So I think that's the...
Right, it's really when you are looking to see, the school is reporting, for example, X% of students graduated, and you want to look at, does the data that they have in their own operating documents match that? And so you're looking at, tens, hundreds, thousands of students
Yeah.
across. And I'm sorry, I thought you said readable.
Legible and readable.
Well, yeah, it's not just legible and readable. I think you said raw data or
Or
something
row
like that.
data, yeah.
It can be
There's a-
readable and legible, but not any more useful than a PDF. So it has to be some different language that captures that it is.
You might have good language actually in the reference to school performance fact sheets. So when you
Okay.
publish a placement rate, you need the documenting evidence for that. And so I don't remember how exactly you reference that data, but it's the same idea. You need the row data that substantiates that statement, that summative statement, right?
Got it.
Okay. So moving on to E, any person authorized changed from chapter to division, be given immediate access and necessary assistance to the document reproduction devices for the purpose of inspecting and copying records. So, immediate access and necessary assistance. Okay, so in this case, we're talking about a bureau person requesting access to a record and being provided both access and assistance to, okay, I don't have an issue with that.
I just have a question. As we go forward here, in this paragraph, it talks about 10 cents per page, and then later it talks about getting access to documents. And I was not clear if anytime the Bureau wants information, it's going to have to pay 10 cents a page. Because in some of these ways in which it might want information, like, for example, a huge spreadsheet, it really just wants the electronic form. So I just, as we go through here, or as you're looking at it afterwards, just make sure that 10 cents doesn't somehow muck up other stuff.
Yeah, and I think in this case, it's specifically tied to document reproduction devices. It's not talking about, providing a PDF on a thumb drive or via email or Dropbox or
Correct.
whatever. Okay. All right, so section F, all records that the institution is required to maintain by the Act or this division shall be made available upon request by any Bureau personnel for inspection and copying during the institution's normal business hours. Requests for documents made by the Bureau by email, letter, or any manner where the Bureau personnel are not physically at the institution shall be provided to the Bureau within 2 business days of the request or a longer period of time if specified in the Bureau's request.
So here's my question. So does that, if they provide, 10 pages of documents on the request and they send it by mail, does that mean 10 cents per 10 page? Or it doesn't?
No, that's a separate section of the regulations. The 10 cents per page is, as Kate pointed out, for the repayment for using their copy machine.
Okay.
So I don't necessarily have any issue with this, although I think depending on the size of the request or what so let's say, for example, the Bureau had a request that's submitted to a school where they want, unlikely, but for the sake of argument, they want a report on every student that's ever enrolled in the school ever. Is 2 business days reasonable? So I think maybe instead of saying or a longer period of time if specified in the Bureau's request, maybe it's or a longer period of time as agreed to by the Bureau or something like that, because I think sometimes 2 business days is just not going to be enough time.
Or maybe a reference to reasonable, like in a,
So maybe something along the lines of requested by the institution for good cause and granted by the Bureau.
That's
that's good.
Moving on to subsection G. If an institution closes, the institution and its owners are jointly and severally responsible to arrange at their expense for the storage and safekeeping. Oh, this, I think, Kent, maybe what you were talking about in the earlier discussion about how are they going to maintain the records, who's going to pay for it.
Correct.
Storage and safekeeping in this state for all records required to be maintained by this division. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Then added language, the location and contact information for the repository of the records must be provided to the Bureau and kept current by notifying the Bureau of any changes. Does that address your earlier question?
No, it just
Nope.
reiterates the issue. So I think it's really a question for folks to look at and see whether they feel confident that legally they're able to access records that are out of state if the school refuses.
Any other notes on G? Okay. One note on, actually, now that I'm looking at this, one note, and I'm just not sure how, what the best way of doing this is, but we have all the language in the regulations about substantive changes and application processes and all those kinds of things that I think schools are aware of, that they know if they're moving or changing their name or ownership or whatever, that they have to go through this process. And here we're talking about keeping the Bureau notified of changes to the, where the records are going to be. What, in your estimation, what would be, is that something that you would create an application for, or would you just say that, notifying within some period of time, because right now it's very kind of nebulous, kept current by notifying the Bureau? That could be,
That could be an email sent to us
okay,
that
doesn't
it
have
had
to
been
take any
changed.
particular form.
Yeah, the problem that we've run into, especially with older transcripts, is we'll have information saying that the transcripts from a closed school were sent to a particular entity, and we'll give the contact information to the requesting party, and then the requesting party calls us back 10 minutes later and says they're not there anymore. And these pieces of information are not being collected. There's not something requiring that it be kept current, that if it's moved somewhere else, where it went, because in the case of a transcript, that's permanent.
Right, okay.
So I think we'll be looking at maybe clarifying that in terms of a time frame as well.
Right.
'Cause there's nothing that says notifying the Bureau of any changes.
Within 30 days or
Yes.
something like that, yeah.
After request or.
Okay. Moving on to H, if an institution contracts with a third party for the servicing, storage, maintenance of any other service involving student records, the institution remains fully responsible for all records, and that they are kept, maintained, stored, and accessible as required by law. I think that's reasonable. The problem, and we've obviously seen this multiple times, is once an institution closes, it's very hard to hold them responsible for the records that no one's maintaining. So, but I think that the language anyway makes sense. Okay. So moving on.
That also includes the fact, even for schools that haven't closed, H is basically saying because you contract out with a third party, even for your current student records, if you're maintaining them on a host or something of that nature, you're still responsible for the maintaining, you know,
Right,
so.
yes. And that's,
Have a good indemnity clause.
yeah, well, and that is consistent with the FERPA requirements as well, so that makes sense to me. Okay, moving on to 71-940, which is, it looks like, can you just tell us, is there any language in 71-940 that is new? Because I know that some of it was moved from 71-920.
B and C.
Okay,
A is basically 1 through 5 from the previous D from 920 move forward, but B and
Got
C are additions.
so I think the only, I think by definition that B makes sense. I would just want to make sure it's clear that you're not required to maintain a transcript for a student who cancels and never, so if they attend the first 5 days and they cancel, you're generally not going to have a transcript for that student. But I think by definition, when you talk about withdraw, terminated, or otherwise not granted a degree, that probably clarifies it anyway. Any other notes on 7140, 79-140? No? Okay. Finally, 71-950, records prior to closing. Prior to closing, an institution shall provide the Bureau with copies of the following pertinent student records for all students enrolled within 120 days of the closure: transcript, enrollment agreement, student financial ledgers. Any particular reason why those three, or not the whole? I mean, if we're talking about an institution that's closing and you're requesting information from the last 120 days, I mean, I don't have any problem with these three particular things, but just wondering if there's some other records that might also be pertinent, or is this just for purposes of a closure that you would just need these?
Yes, it's the latter. For closure, we would need all of these for the various aspects, for all the various aspects from STRIF, ensuring proper closures, proper refunds, et cetera. I do want to make one note. It was brought to my attention about a week ago that we need to add a provision, probably a B under here, for electronic standardization as well on this one, because changes through SB 1492 allow closure records in hard copy or electronic, so we will need to specify the electronic what it is. So we'll just add that. It'll be along the same lines as what you've seen throughout this. It just needs to be added to this section as well.
Okay.
A question, why not include what is currently 71-950 under the 76-240, which is already laying out the requirements for closures?
That is a possibility. It could be put over there, but this is more in lines with the specific documents or pertinent copies of documents under the statute on closure of 94 or 927.5. Now I got that one, Kate.
You've memorized it since we spoke. I totally get what Joseph is saying, because on one hand, we have now 4 sections that are specific to record keeping and things that relate to records, but they're not sort of separately, there isn't a separate section that's like student records, and then these are all under that section, right? They're all their own individual sections. So this last records prior to closing, you know, I think it could go in either place, but we are basically laying all this stuff out about what's required for the closure and the teach-out plan, and these things I think would make sense to be part of the teach-out plan.
Especially for clarity, in the sense that a school that's going through that circumstance is looking through the section. They're going to be reading 76-240. What do I have to do? And I have to, under I have to provide a list of students from this 120 days with all this stuff. And then separately in 71-950, I need to give them the enrollment agreements, the transcripts, where if it were in the same section, you'd have probably higher compliance from schools that are under a stressful situation. Right?
Yeah, I would say at bare minimum, we at least need a cross-reference.
Right, yeah. Yeah, including the records in 71-950. Yeah, I think that could do it too. I agree, Joseph. I think they might miss it
Yeah.
if they're not together. Yeah.
I'm wondering, as far as the documents provided prior to closure, whether if the school has copies of any loan agreements or financing agreements, that wouldn't be also useful for the Bureau to have in connection, again, with refunds, our STRIF filings. And also, for the same reason, any complaint records if a student had filed a complaint against the school.
We do ask for the enrollment agreements, but yeah.
Now, I'm thinking the financing agreements as well as you've already got the enrollment agreements, but any financial agreements, which might not be part of the enrollment agreement.
Yeah, I think that's separate from the ledgers you're talking about.
Yeah,
That
I
might be
think,
something separate from the ledgers, student financial ledgers.
Right.
Yeah, so
That's
I think
separate
you're
from
talking
that.
about like promissory notes.
Promissory notes, that's right,
That
that kind of thing. Because often, students are asked to provide that, and they don't have it. The school may very well have that information. And for the same reason, wouldn't you also need this for the closure of a location as well as an institution, or you think you wouldn't need it for that because the school will still exist and have it?
The school's still around.
The
right?
school
They
still
have
exists, so the records have to be maintained
Presumably they
pursuant.
would, yeah.
Okay, any other questions for Kent or Christy about the draft regs?
I just have one, observation. So I noticed that pertinent was removed from various other locations in the regulations, but it wasn't under this section. Pertinent? I'm sorry?
I think you said pertinent, the word pertinent. I think it's because what we're trying to do in the section records prior to closing is defined by, the statute says prior to closing, the Bureau must be provided with copies of pertinent student records as determined by the Bureau pursuant to regulation. So we're
defining what the
defining
pertinent.
what those pertinent records are. So we don't want to cause confusion by having it elsewhere, but we are going to go back and make sure that it's clear and cross-reference between this section and the other section. So thank you for your comment.
All right, thank you, Kent. Does anyone have any public comment about the proposed regs before we move back into the regularly scheduled programming? All right. All right, so back to the agenda. Thanks very much, Kent. Bureau operations update and discussion. The first is the budget report with Matt. And there he is. Good morning.
As you may recall, the advisory committee was, and as you similarly are today, interested in the Bureau's revenues and expenditures. But more specifically, the advisory committee was most interested in the impact of the newly adopted annual institution fee schedule as required by SB 1192. Please recall, SB 1192 set the Bureau's annual institution fee beginning January 1, 2017 at 0.545 of 1% of the total gross revenue derived from an institution's main and branch locations, with a minimum fee of $2,500 and a maximum fee of $60,000 per location. Additionally, the maximum amount any single institution can be charged in a given year is $750,000. Under the provisions of SB 1192, beginning July 1, 2018, the annual institution fee rate increased from 0.45 to 0.55 of 1%. Last February, and based on 6 months of reported revenues and expenditures, the time period from July through December, I reported that projected year-end revenues were consistent with our estimates as displayed in the governor's budget. I further reported that the Bureau would likely not fully expend its expenditures, its appropriation. Since that time, we've concluded 2017-18, and while we're not fully haven't fully reconciled the fiscal year, we do have preliminary closing numbers, which I've populated in the fund condition statement I've provided to the advisory committee today. I'm pleased to report that the pre-closing actual revenues remain consistent with the governor's budget. Total actual revenues in 17-18 came in approximately $144,000 higher than as displayed in the governor's budget. But I would note the annual institution fee was only higher by $25,000, which equates to a variance of less than 0.2% on revenues of $13.4 million. Expenditures came in at $14.159 million, which was slightly higher than I had reported in February. Moving down, the fund condition displays a reserve balance of $8.165 million, or 5.8 months in reserve. And it's important to note that the Bureau's statutory fund balance cap limit is 6 months. So the Bureau is abiding. Are there any questions about the prior year?
Is it, it would be correct then that the 17-18 year was a complete year of the initial increase tier?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we can move to the current year 18-19 column. Now this includes the fee rate adjustment, which began at the beginning of the fiscal year, July 1, 2018. The numbers in this middle column are the same as they are displayed in the 2018-19 Budget Act with updated revenues. We've made minor revenue adjustments. Now please remember, this is assuming the basic landscape and number of institutions remains consistent with as they were in 2017-18. For expenditures, the $15.737 million is the Bureau's full appropriation. And we're showing this because we have limited data at this time to revise our estimate. And then this shows a fund balance reserve of 5.6 months. Any questions?
The full appropriation assumes, Dr. Marion, a full staff, and you're still somewhat short, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Correct. And does this include the IT expenditure for the project, or that's a separate?
No, it does not include the IT.
Okay. And is
Well,
that?
it does not include, it includes, so it's my understanding that the Bureau is redirecting some resources currently for planning purposes, et cetera, and so that would be included. But for the procurement of the new IT system, it's not included.
Got it.
Is that because the expenditure hasn't happened yet?
Right, it's coming.
And it's going to be outside the scope of these 3 years, right? Because we're talking 21?
21.
Okay. So you're not going to pay for any part of that until 21, as far as the actual system itself?
Are you gonna let me borrow some money?
I got $14 in my wallet. It's all yours.
Okay, so the final column, the 1920, this is sort of a pre-governor's budget column here. We're showing modest growth in total revenues, and we're anticipating the annual institution fee to remain relatively stable. For expenditures, the 15.897 number is calculated by taking the 18-19 appropriation less some limited term funding plus a 2% growth factor. And we're using this growth factor as a proxy for some of the various incremental adjustments that we'll be making for employee compensation and retirement costs related to various bargaining units. And that will all become public with the release of the governor's budget in January.
The 1.5 million, roughly 1.4 million increase in revenues from renewal fees between 17-18 and 18-19, is that solely the result of the increase in the rate from 0.045 to 0.055?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Not solely. You'll notice that delinquent fees went up substantially.
Right.
Typically, the delinquent fees were more around less than $300,000, but they did jump up. But we would anticipate that because that's based on a percentage of the fees that the institution is paying. So I would just like to make a few final comments. First, I would note that the Bureau's revenues are very complicated. A lot of ins, a lot of outs, a lot of what have yous. And so to the extent institutions either contract or expand or morph into something other, this model becomes less reliable. Second, the fund condition statement displays a prudent fund balance reserve in all 3 years. And third, the fund condition statement does not take into account any legislative mandates that may be coming and cause additional cost pressures on the Bureau. And then lastly, to speak to the point about the IT, it's not included in this model, but we would, it's going to be coming down in the out years. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, I have a question, and I think you might have said this in your comments, but I want to make sure I'm clear. What was the delta between what would have been the 16-17 annual fees and the 17-18 annual fees, given the change in the structure of how the fees were calculated?
So it was 1/10 of a percentage point. So it went from 0.45 to 0.55 of 1%.
No, I'm sorry. I mean, what was, from the collection standpoint of annual fees, how much did the change to the 0.045 from
so
the previous
it's the
structure?
difference, right? It's the difference between the about $2 million, not quite $2 million. It's the difference between the 13,422 and the 15,231.
I think he's actually going back another year
Yeah,
to 16, 17.
thank you, Joseph. I did not say that clearly. Yeah. I'm wondering how much of an impact the change in the statute had.
Right. Okay. So for 16, 17,
Right,
I would have to
right.
get back to you. This doesn't have it.
Yeah,
and I don't
yeah.
have it right off the.
Okay, because I thought you said something about the difference being some small, like, overall dollar amount wasn't that
So for
much of a
16,
difference.
17, if you remember, we had half-year revenues in
Right.
16, 17, but it was the old fee structure, and so it was much
Right.
different.
Right.
Branches were charged like $1,000 or
Right.
$1,500. They weren't charged they were on a per location flat fee.
Right.
And so now we're charging, the charge is based on the revenue generated. from
Right.
that.
Yeah. So that's
It's
essentially
totally
my
different.
question
Right.
is how much of an impact on the collected annual revenues did that change have? And if you don't have that, maybe that's something we could, it obviously, the reason the question, I think.
I do have
was-
it. I
Oh, you
have
do?
it.
Great.
I do have it.
Awesome.
So it's about $3 million. The renewal line collected $10.4 million in 16, 17.
Okay.
And the expenditures here includes OSAR as well, right? That's all rolled into the
Yes.
same department. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Any other questions about the financial impact? So one other, I guess, thing of note, which came up a couple of previous meetings, is whether or not the statutory language from the 045 to the 055, whether or not that fee structure was necessary for purposes of funding the Bureau. Was it too much? And because obviously for some institutions, the change was substantial, and for others, not so much. But I think it's interesting to note that the increase in annual fees collected over, between 16, 17 and 17, 18 was pretty sizable. I mean, 3 million, especially with a sort of shrinking school base, that's a pretty big jump. Is it your position that, based on the governor's previous budgets and where the Bureau is standing right now, that 045 and now 055 is reasonable considering the Bureau's needs and requirements, or is it something that is potentially more than necessary and could be adjusted? And I understand that's a question for the legislature, but I'm just wondering what your...
I would restrict my comments just to reporting what was actually coming in and how we're budgeting it. And this is our estimate is based on the landscape and the number of institutions and the revenue that they bring in.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions on this for Matt? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Any public comment on the budget, financials? Nothing? Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so next up on the agenda, enforcement report. we have Yvette and Beth. And since Beth covers parts of both, I'll let you guys lead off with enforcement, and then we can go into compliance.
Okay. Good morning, Yvette Johnson, Enforcement Chief for Complaint Investigations and Discipline. You've been provided with the statistical reports for the first 3 quarters of 2018. And as always with our statistical report, we like to start off with the highlights of what the Complaint Investigations Unit has accomplished. I'm sorry, Wayne. So for the first 3 quarters of 2018, staff working with the students have achieved a $70,107 amount in refunds to students or to their federal student aid accounts. We've also assisted students in getting credits for units in the amount of $20,532. We've assisted students in getting grades issued, getting their certificates of completion, proof of training documents, transcripts, and other records that the students have requested from the schools that they have been unable to achieve themselves. We've helped students with, if the school has said that they would provide job placement assistance, we've assisted students in getting that assistance. We have helped students complete programs that they may have otherwise not been able to do. And we've also done quite a bit of mediation with students, between students and schools. I apologize, Mike. So based on the statistics we have, we show that we have closed an average of 56 complaints per month. Although we receive an average of 62 complaints per month, we are still persevering and moving forward with these. At the beginning of the year, we showed that we had 1,147 complaints pending. As of last month, at the end of last month, we're back to that number. We have 1,149 complaints pending as opposed to the 1,200 that had gone up to. So we're still working through those complaints. Does anybody have any questions about the statistical reports that's been presented? Okay. The next item on the agenda is the complaint backlog solutions. Our staff has been working diligently to get through the complaints that we have sitting, and we have staff that have anywhere between 20 complaints and 100 complaints. So one thing that we're working on is, as you know, with the workload that high, that can be very overwhelming. So we're looking at redistributing those cases to staff so that it could be more evenly distributed amongst the staff, so we don't have those that are on the far spectrums, and allowing staff to focus on the complaints on their desk. Because when you have so many complaints, it can, like I said, it can get very overwhelming and you just don't know where to start. So we have the managers that are working with the staff to help them work through those complaints. We're instituting case review so that managers can be more involved with the cases that the staff are working, so that if a staff person has a case that they're not quite sure what to do with, we're making sure that they have that communication with their manager so that they're able to move forward to the next step. One of the other solutions that we have is, as I reported previously, we had 11 vacancies in our unit. We have filled 9 of those vacancies. We have 2 that we're still recruiting for. We have put our recruitments on a continuous basis so that we don't have to keep pulling it back and going forth with it, which makes it go a little bit, the transition for the recruitment go a little bit smoother. We also hired 2 very enthusiastic retired annuitants. One of the retired annuitants has over 20 years of investigative background, and the other retired annuitant was a previous member of the Bureau for Private Postsecondary and Vocational Education. So she has the knowledge of the laws and regulations. As I mentioned in previous advisory committee meetings, we have some of the backlog, I don't want to use the word backlog, but some of the caseload was on the manager's desk because we didn't have a full management staff, and they didn't have the opportunity to review the cases as they were coming in from staff. So we had quite a bit of work on our manager's desk. We are now to the point where the manager review is no more than 2 to 3 weeks out. So once a case is submitted, it can be reviewed within 2 to 3 weeks by a manager, which is incredible for where we've come from. We've also instituted what we call an all-day Friday case review. I'm not going to use the other word that we call it, where our managers and 3 of our staff, 3 of our senior staff, Richard Acosta, Leslie Feist, and Tori Gaines, we actually go into a room and all we do is case review. So all cases that staff submit, we take that opportunity to review those cases to determine the next steps for them. And so we really appreciate the help of those staff members in helping us get through that caseload. We've also instituted evening and Saturday overtime, and that's for both staff and managers. We are working with continued training of staff with those 9 vacancies that were filled. Of course, we have the staff, the time that is taken away from actually working complaints to train those staff. So we have both managers and the more senior staff mentoring the new staff that are coming on board. Another solution that we came up with was we already had an unlicensed activity team from the Complaint Investigations Unit. However, thank you, licensing. We have inherited 5 staff from licensing that are strictly focused on working unlicensed activity complaints. So we took the complaints from the unlicensed activity team that was within the Complaint Investigations Unit, and the staff from licensing will be able to focus solely on those complaints. There were 104 complaints that we were able to give to the new instituted team, and they'll be able to work on those. And so they'll take those from beginning of the investigation all the way through whatever the next step will be, whether it be a citation or. We are also working on an enforcement manual, which will provide more prescriptive as well as descriptive steps for the staff to take when conducting investigations. It goes hand in hand with the training that's being provided. So this is something that staff from the Complaint Investigations Unit is actually working on, so we can get their input and their, because they're the ones that are actually out there doing the job, so they know what type of resources and tools that are needed, and so we wanted to make sure that we had their input on this. Another step that we're taking is, as I've mentioned in previous meetings, is collaboration with other units within the Bureau. When we're doing our joint investigations and joint inspections with our compliance unit, in the past, our internal complaints we've been about 30% internally generated complaints. Now that we're doing joint investigations and inspections, it removes the need to actually open up another complaint, and we can focus on an investigation of the school to its fullest. So we have the information from the inspection, and as opposed to the inspector providing us with an enforcement referral and opening a new complaint, the investigator's already there on site, so they can incorporate whatever information is found from that joint investigation inspection into their current report or their current investigation.
And one of the things that I want to make sure to add to what Yvette is saying, I think often people may forget, is that when you see the number of complaints, you see 1149. I think as of today, often people don't realize 1/3 of those complaints are internally generated, meaning that our staff found those complaints. Those weren't complaints coming from students. And so I think that's important to know, but also I think it's critical to know that often when people use the term backlog, you have a processing time. And so as soon as the complaint comes in, traditionally speaking, based on the Bureau's history, that is considered a backlog, and that's not considered a backlog. That means we just going through the intake process. Every organization that we have has a processing time, and so even you can look at all the other bureaus and boards at DCA, they have a process time, and then whatever after that process time, they may be conversations about backlog. But once again, as soon as it comes into BBPE, one of the things I think is people don't understand is that once we receive it, for whatever reason, historically, it's been considered a backlog, and I don't think that's fair or realistic. I think we need to allow that time to process. And I think also people also forget that we close over close to 800 cases a year. Like on average, that's what we do. And that's not talking about the internal stuff that we still are working with from when we were reestablished in 2010. And so I just want to make sure that that point is made in your report as too, Yvette.
What is your target processing time? Your argument makes a lot of sense that there should be a given period of time, and it's only considered past due after, 90 days, 180 days? Like, what would your target be, or are you going to create one?
The previous bureau, when it was instituted in 2000, not the previous, but when it was instituted in 2010, target dates were at 180 days
Okay.
for, and that was not including anything that went on for any type of disciplinary action, but just for the resolution of a complaint itself.
Mhm. Got it.
And, sorry, I briefly forgot what I was going to say. So you were just talking about this sort of joint working on a complaint, right? So if you had a complaint came in from a student or internally generated, and then you're partnering up with the enforcement unit or the complaint
Compliance.
unit, and you may be actually adding to the complaint. So where the student had a complaint about their transcript, now it has become a larger thing. Does that impact, you think, the time? Because if it's one student and one complaint, you could maybe solve that in 90 days. But if it kind of turns into, oh, there's a bigger issue at the school, that original complaint stays open, right?
It depends, because if it's something that we can handle with the student, that the student's issue just needs to be resolved, then we'll do that. But if it's something where it is a larger issue, something that's more systemic with the institution, we could add another complaint on there.
So is that
Open up as an
impacting the
internal
time?
investigation.
I don't want to use the word
Because
backlog.
We don't want
Does it
to-
impact that?
We don't want our larger investigation to impact one student complaint
Right.
that could be resolved quickly.
Right, right. I'm just thinking more for sort of your data analytics process. If you have a student complaint that sort of triggers a bigger investigation, for purposes of identifying when a complaint is closed, would you consider that student's complaint closed at the point you deal with that student's issue, or does it stay open until you deal with the systemic issue?
We try to do the work for the student. We
Okay.
want to do theirs first and, handle whatever's going on. But we can keep in contact with that student to let them know that if there was a larger issue that could impact them further.
So year to date, 11% of your closures have been duplicate entries. That was the reason for closure. Did you scan all of the outstanding complaints? Is that all of the duplicates, or is that a regular run rate? That is, as you go, you're finding over time that 10% of them are duplicates? And if it's the latter, is there a way for you to do a global scan to clear out all of the duplicates and consolidate them into single tickets?
And actually, the duplicate category is kind of misleading.
Okay.
And that it was a catch-all for us if we had multiple complaints on the same school and they were anonymous, or we had multiple complaints where one came from a student and one was anonymous, but they were the same issue, we could close out the anonymous as a duplicate. We would close out the anonymous as a duplicate and add it to the complaint that actually had a complainant attached to it.
Got it.
And so the issue was still being looked at, but we weren't keeping complaints open.
And so-
that we had no one to respond to.
And have you done that to the 1,100 cases that are
Yes,
outstanding?
That's what we're working through that to see where, we call it case consolidation.
Right.
So we're going through and consolidating the cases that we can.
Got it. And you would never do that, please confirm, if there were two students, so Mary and John both
Right.
have a complaint against the student, you would never consolidate Mary and John?
Right, because
Okay.
they deserve their own
Got it.
responses.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions regarding item number 2? Okay, the next one is the follow-up regarding unresolved student complaints. In August, we initiated a plan to reach out to complainants that had older cases, and the initial step was for staff to survey their cases and to reach out to any complainants in which they had not had contact during 2018. We found that there were a total of 265 complaints that were identified through that process. So in doing that, we sent out 129 letters. 77 emails, and made 59 phone calls. Of the 129 letters that we sent out, we received 54 responses. 36 of those responses requested that we continue to pursue those complaints. 18 said no. And the other ones, we either did not receive a response or we had no way of getting in contact with them. We did receive a response from them. Of the 77 emails that went out, 29 responses were received, and 24 of those responses requested that we continue to pursue their complaint.
I'm sorry, those statistics you're giving us right now, they're not on here, right?
No.
Okay.
No, they're not.
Just want-
We made 59 phone calls, and we received 13 responses, and 11 of those requested that we continue to pursue the complaint. So we reached out to those individuals in any way that they provided us with contact information. While some of them we were not able to get any response from, it doesn't mean that we won't continue to pursue their complaint. If there's any way that we can resolve the complaint by working with the institution or getting information from the institution, then we'll continue to work the complaint that route. However, if there was not enough information in the original complaint that was received, then those complaints we will need to close out. We have to close out.
How long will you keep a complaint open if you can't reach the complainant?
That's a goal that we're working on. That's the number that we're working on to see what is reasonable. And when we reach out, we have our goal of reaching out to the complainant within the first 14 days of receiving the complaint. If we don't receive a response from them within a period of time, then those complaints will be closed out if it's something that we cannot pursue on our own without their assistance. We also have staff, based on this survey that we did, we also have staff working on their oldest 5 complaints that they have in their caseload. And the managers are working with them to establish deadlines for completing those cases. Any questions? Okay, the next item is working relationships with DCA and other consumer protection agencies. Currently, the Bureau has memorandums of understanding with the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology, the Board of Registered Nursing, the Board of Vocational Nursing and Psychiatric Technicians, and the California Acupuncture Board. Of these boards and bureaus that we have memorandums with, we have conducted joint investigations or inspections with, and we also work with the Division of Investigation with the Department of Consumer Affairs on some of our cases.
And we currently have one pending with massage.
You're talking about the California Massage Therapy
Yes.
Council?
Yep.
Yes.
Can I ask quickly about the status of that MOU? Do you have an estimated timeframe by which it should be complete?
So we gave it to them, we completed it and sent it over there. It's been with them for at least, I would say, 3 months.
Okay,
So we're just waiting to get it back from them.
thanks.
Yep.
Yvette, can I ask a clarifying question? Did you say that Respiratory Care Board of California, did you mention that one? Because I have that on my list as an MOU that you have.
No, I don't. I forgot about that one, Respiratory Care Board.
I think you said acupuncture.
Acupuncture,
Which
yes.
I did not have on my list, so.
Okay.
Can you just briefly go through that list again, please?
Sure. It's the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology, Board of Registered Nursing, Board of Vocational Nursing and Psychiatric Technicians, California Acupuncture Board, and the Respiratory Care Board. Thank you, Nina. We also have staff that are working closely with various district attorneys' offices, county bureaus of investigation, Department of Insurance, Department of Industrial Relations, and the Employment Development Department. In September, one of our staff members, Karen Johnson, did a presentation with the Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office on supplemental job displacement benefit voucher fraud. And we have received requests from other agencies to provide that same presentation. We also have a staff member that has been a contributor to the Anti-Fraud Alliance newsletter, which also dealt with voucher fraud. On some of our cases, we've worked with the Office of the Inspector General. Of course, we worked with the accreditors, the U.S. Department of Education, Homeland Security, and Federal Trade Commission. Any questions? All right. And the last item that I have is the request for sampling of consumer complaints. This is something Ms. Ryder has requested at a previous meeting. And back in, I believe it was our May meeting this year, I actually provided a sample of, it was a summary of complaints that we had resolved during January of 2018. So I'm not sure if there was something else that you wanted outside of that.
So Yvette, I think that summary, and it says January 2018.
Yes.
So that was recently provided. And I know that members have asked for student complaints, actual copies of student complaints before, and I've kind of chimed in and said those aren't public records, but we have it on the agenda to have a discussion about it. I just want to say that there's two overarching issues with releasing actual complaints of students. One is the right of privacy that students have when they submit a complaint to the Bureau. They don't expect it to be distributed publicly. If we gave it to members of this committee, it would be required to be a public disclosure. The second overarching issue is the investigatory aspect of a complaint. So when a complaint comes in and the Bureau starts investigating a school, generally you don't want that school to know it's being investigated. So if the school does know it's being investigated, it can tamper with witnesses, it can destroy evidence, there's problems with that. So those are the two overarching issues that are supported by the law of why generally the Bureau does not have a practice of disclosing complaints. And so what we did here is did a summary, and the Bureau can do more summaries. The Bureau is also looking at whether it has, in some cases on the complaint form, there's a question about whether the student authorizes the Bureau to disclose the complaint to the school. And the Bureau's in the process of looking at those complaints to see if they have those complaints and if they have been disclosed to the school. In those cases, there might be a legal waiver, so it might not, there may be a public disclosure. So we would be looking at whether we could provide those specific complaints to the committee, and we would, at this point, redact the students' names and the school names. So you'd get basically the summary of the allegation that you'd get in this type of summary document.
You said there's going to be, there's an agenda item where we can discuss this?
Yes, it's
What number is that? I'm missing it. 5.
we're discussing it right under this right now.
Right now, okay. So I can say something now.
Yes, and we could discuss it.
On that issue, what I was asking for is closed complaints. So those wouldn't involve current investigative issues or letting the school know about something that hadn't already been resolved. And I was suggesting one of two ways it could be done. One would be to simply redact any personal identifying information, which I think would be the best way. And the second possibility instead would be to summarize what the complaint was. What I am interested in looking at is I don't feel that I have a very good understanding of, for example, I see complaints that are closed because of, let's see, where are some of them? Not substantiated. I don't have an understanding. I mean, I've heard the explanations, but I'd really like to see, some actual, these we figured out are unsubstantiated. And just a random sampling, not, cherry-picked or whatever. Or compliance obtained. What was the complaint? What did they actually get out of this? Non-jurisdictional. Well, what was done with it if it was non-jurisdictional? Was there then a follow-up with another agency offering assistance so that they could handle it, like with the DA or whoever it might have been? And so that's kind of what I'm looking at. I don't have a good sense of actually how complaints are being resolved. So I think it could be done in a way that doesn't interfere with anyone's privacy, and in a way that it wouldn't interfere with the investigative process while it's an ongoing complaint. But I think it would be helpful to see what was the complaint and what was the specifically what did the investigator say, this is why I'm closing it as X because of, this, this, and this. Or here are the steps that we took to look at this, contacted student, got this information, contacted school, got this information, went back to student, or whatever the steps are, just a random sampling of closed complaints, so we have just a better sense so that we can be more helpful in providing whatever guidance we might think appropriate. I think it would be helpful, actually, in a couple of ways. One, it would help us be better able to give our assistance, and another would be when people say, well, my complaint wasn't handled, we can know how, not that specific complaint, but we can understand how they are being handled and say, well, this is how we saw it being handled in this circumstance, and, this seems appropriate or whatever. So I think it could help the Bureau and help us to help the Bureau.
Thank you.
Yes. Any other questions from the committee to Ms. Johnson? Is there any public comment? Oh, go ahead, Margaret.
I had just a couple of questions on these charts. What happened in July to cause that uptick in complaints, and what happened in August to cause that uptick in resolution of complaints? Do you have any sense, or was it just random? Let's see.
So in August of 2018, with the uptake on the closed complaints, that was when we initiated the Free for All Friday, where we did the
That was the name you weren't going to use? I like that, free for all.
Where we actually had the staff and the managers go into the room and review complaints. So that was some of the backlog. I keep using the word backlog, but that was the work caseload at the manager's desk.
Doesn't matter what we call it. There's complaints there.
So we were able to get through quite a bit of those right during August.
And why was the uptick in the complaints received in July? Do you have any sense of what happened then? I think it's page 30.
I can't tell you off the top of my head what the
Okay.
uptake was for.
And then in September, the complaints closed dropped back down to the more normal level. Is that because there weren't more situations in which you could use that process, or what happened there?
I would have to say that life happens, and our free-for-all Fridays were not as consistent during the month of September as they had been previously.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. I have a quick question, or a quick couple questions. Help me understand how the intake of complaints happens. Is I'm assuming that there's something online where a complaint can be submitted. Is it taken over the phone? Is there a direct kind of intake method that you guys prefer to use?
Unfortunately, we don't have control over that, but we do receive complaints in various methods.
Okay.
We receive them via snail mail, and I'm going to use Kate, fax, facsimile. We receive online complaints through the DCA, and sometimes we just receive emails. So we have an intake analyst, our office technician, that receives those complaints. They're reviewed to determine, and we send usually within 3 days of having received the complaint, we send out a letter to the complainant letting them know that we have received their complaint and that it's being assigned.
Got it. And you mentioned that the goal was within 14 days to make contact with the complainant?
Once it's been assigned to an analyst.
Got it.
To do the investigation or the review of the complaint, then we want to make sure that they reach out to the complainant so that they can get the full story. Because oftentimes when we receive complaints, it's not a full picture of what the complaint is.
Sure.
I have a complaint about my school. Don't know the name of the school, don't know what program the student was involved in. So just getting that information so that we can pursue the complaint.
Got it. So it's complaint is received, intake happens, 3 days, complainant is notified that their complaint's been received. What's at the point that it's notified to the point that it's assigned to an investigator, what's the kind of buffer time there?
It's within that 3-day period, it's being assigned to the analyst as well.
So the complainant's notified and it's assigned
And it's
out
being assigned.
14 days from that point. Are these work days?
These are work days, yes.
Okay, got it. So within 3 weeks, work weeks, the complainant should have been notified that their complaint's been received and contacted by the investigator, right?
Correct.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Do you have a measure of your delivery on that? Like how often that's happening?
That's something that we're working on. We're making updates to our data system, our sales system, so that we can do a better tracking of how long those timeframes are, as well as utilizing our Excel spreadsheets.
As a global issue related to the outstanding caseload, there are some areas in which you can have better performance and your staff could be more productive, and then there are a large block where the complainant is being non-responsive or you don't have enough information to go on, and you don't have a method of disaggregating those, which makes it difficult. And
Yes, that's why we're working.
so I would just encourage any way short of, and if the Emerald City is the new IT system in 2021, like that's a long ways from now, right? So
And
what can be done in the interim?
Right, that's why we're making changes to our IT system that we currently have, as well as making updates to our spreadsheets that we utilize, so
Right.
that we can see where each step of the way where the complaint is, and we can see where the holdup is.
So I completely agree that, and I've said this before, that the 2021 timeline is a ways and we have to make some changes now. And we've definitely been doing that and working with Jason Piccioni in the back, who looks like he's trying to sneak out in regards to doing some of those things.
Get back here.
And I hate to say Band-Aids, but basically trying to see what we can do to fix our current process that will sustain us till we get the new process. And it's not ideal. I've said this multiple times, it's not the perfect situation. And I hate that it has to be 2021, but the reality is that we have to go through a process just like anything else. And I know we will be getting an update on that. And so I don't want to steal that thunder.
How soon do you think that the Band-Aids will be in place?
We're working daily.
I would say, hopefully, as soon as we get that new system, they will be all gone. But the reality of it is that I'm not going to wait.
No, I know. I'm saying how soon will your Band-Aids actually be in place? So, for example, you would be able to get that data that Joe was talking about here. Or how would, I think another thing we've talked about is data showing when you have referred a complaint over to another investigative agency, so that we know you're not the one having it sitting on your desk here.
Right.
How soon are those how do you think those kind of Band-Aid type fixes will be in place?
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that one. That's something I'm definitely going to have to look into.
I have one more question. I just was kind of thinking about it. You had mentioned that, among other things that you're doing with the 9 new investigators, there's a manual that's being created that's going to give some clear guidance. That sounds great. Is there a formal process that new investigators go through? Is there a school or like an in-house training that they're sent to, or is most of their training on the job under supervision?
We have on-the-job training, as well as we have initial onboarding that we have, where it's about a 2-week period where we go through the procedures that we have in place, as well as an overview of the investigative processes, how investigation should be conducted within the Bureau. And the Department of Consumer Affairs actually has an enforcement academy as well that we send our staff through, as well as we utilize the CLEAR training through, I can't think of it, the acronym is CLEAR, that we send our investigators through for other types of formalized training and investigation techniques. As well as we utilize the Attorney General's office that has helped us with investigative techniques, art of testifying, report writing.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And just one other question. I see in 2018, I guess this is page 29, complaints received and complaints closed. And it looks as if, despite your best efforts, complaints are coming in faster than you're closing them. So how are we going to catch up? I mean, I know you have new staff that's come on recently, and so I guess part of it is you're hoping that that will help pick up the pace. Anything else, or, because it,
Right.
and how much difference will that make? Will that mean that, you know, you're getting in roughly, say, 50 and you're closing 70 or 60 or?
Right. Great question. I think one of the things that I'm actually going to give credit to Lisa Ferretti is the new unlicensed unit, which will definitely, I think they talked about a little bit earlier, that's going to help with 100+ complaints that are coming in. I think once again, filling those new positions, also not to forgetting that we're going to be moving, and then having everybody in one house will be beneficial versus having conversations with, different departments per se. I think that's going to be helpful. And I think a big part that I don't want to underscore is the training that's going to be needed for those 9 people. I mean, you know, of all people, 9, you can come in and we can train somebody in 2 weeks, but the reality is they're not going to be really effective and ready to go probably until a year out, just because they just need to really get it. So I think for me, I would say it's going to take a little bit more time. And as I said, I think we're going to have to be patient with this process, and it's not ideal by any stretch, because for me as the bureau chief, I think I definitely want, I want things to happen immediately, but I just unfortunately are not in a place to do that. And so all we can do is keep on doing better and having these special projects that we have assigned in special units. And I think we'll be all right.
So you figure in order for the new employees to get up to speed and to actually make a difference in the number of complaints being handled, how much time are we really talking about? 6 months, a year before we start to see that a major change in the closures versus the beginning complaints?
Go ahead, Yvette.
I would say at least within the first 6 months, we should see a change in the number of complaints received versus and those that are being closed. We do say usually that it's about a 1.5 year learning curve for everybody to just really get comfortable with our unique laws.
Yeah.
And I would even say, even for myself, I've been at the Bureau just over a year now, and I'm still feel like I'm learning stuff every day that I wasn't aware of. And so I think it's just a learning curve, and as everybody knows, the BPPE regulations and things are complicated, and so it's going to take us a little bit of time to get comfortable with where we are.
The other question I'd raised is in the past, and maybe this isn't an appropriate time to raise this, but I had questioned whether, since we're all caught up on licensing, and I'm not sure, maybe what you're saying is that some of the people doing the unlicensed complaints, they're coming from licensing, so you are utilizing them. Okay, great,
Correct.
thank you.
Any other questions for Yvette on the enforcement unit? Any public comment on this first part of our discussion? Okay. I can always look up and look at Angela, and she'll shake her head, and I know we're safe to move on. Okay, so moving on to compliance report.
Hi, good morning. My name is Beth Scott. I'm the enforcement chief, and I'm going to be speaking to you today about some issues with compliance. First, I'm going to talk to you about item C2, which is the question and answer section that the annual report designed and facilitate and developed, which is a monthly call to institutions that are, it's available to the institutions, and we have a representative from each of our units within the Bureau. This provides an opportunity for schools to ask questions and get direction, as well as topics of issues that we see. So far, we have had 8 calls, a total of 63 schools participating in these calls. Some of the schools have multiple participants. This has been very well received and very productive. Our most popular questions are annual report related, school performance fact sheet, web requirements, and that type of issue. You'll be hearing more about some of the things we're doing to address some of these concerns in a later segment on our new annual report system that's coming out. I do want to thank the annual report unit. The manager, Marcus Dawson, is behind me in the audience. They've put a lot of work into this. We do surveys after, and it's really well received and really appreciated by the schools. And so we're hoping with some of this opportunities, then the compliance inspections will have less minor violations when we go out, based on schools getting direction on what to do prior to our arrival. Is there any questions on this new process? And the second thing I want to talk about is section C1. It's our compliance inspections. We continue to collaborate with other units and look for items to increase our productivity. One such improvement we've made is we've automated a section of the compliance inspection. We have provided Surface Pro tablets to the inspectors, which has alleviated the need for them to carry laptops and printers to the inspection, and it's enabled us to electronically issue notice to complies to the school immediately. They can sign on the tablet and it's emailed to them, as well as it can be printed if need be. So that's been a real improvement for the inspectors. I want to thank the inspectors. They're very involved and engaged and committed. We have goals and set plans for our compliance inspections. In October, we completed 18 inspections, so our inspections are on an upward trend, and we're striving to increase this. We have this upward momentum, and it's I really appreciate all of their hard work and their dedication, and we're looking forward to seeing this number rise in the near future. Is there any questions on this section? The third thing I want to talk about is the student surveys. The survey that we will be using, we did take some of the recommendations of this committee and incorporate into the survey that we will be using for the compliance inspection purposes. That's on page 39 and 40 of your packet. We did get great recommendations to survey outside the inspection process, so we are working towards that with some of the other suggestions that were offered, and we will be looking to develop a survey to use outside of the compliance inspection, so we're able to survey past students, current students that are not just during the inspection process. So you'll be hearing more about that in the near future.
And so just to add to the Beth's point, something that I've been having some internal conversations with our team at the Bureau, and I have to give credit to Marcus Dawson, who's here, is that there's been conversation about creating a unit within the Bureau that focuses on data and research. And it would definitely take part in some of those things that Beth was talking about, trying to send out outside surveys. I haven't made any finalization. This is still in the oven, and we're just processing if we want to do this and if it makes sense to do it.
Is there any questions on any of the things that I've spoken about today?
Can I make some comments on the survey? Is that okay? Just under number 1, I think it would be helpful if those were just put in alphabetical order so that they don't suggest that you're more interested in, say, class size as an issue than something else. Because, I don't know, I just think that makes more sense there. Given that you don't have any information from students about how far they are along in the program, I'm wondering if that limits the usefulness of the survey. My thinking is, for example, somebody who's just started the program, they think I've learned everything I'm supposed to learn about my finances and how much it's going to cost me and how much I'm going to have to pay. And then they get towards the end of the program, they maybe start getting notices about when their payments start and so forth. And they go, whoops, I didn't know that. So I'm just wondering whether, at the beginning of the program, as far as they know, they've got all the equipment they need because they don't really know what's needed yet. But if they're further along, they may have experienced not having the equipment. So does not having on here some way to identify how far along they are in the program, do you think limit the value of the survey?
Well, like I said, we are looking at all of the recommendations to broaden the survey to be utilized. This survey captures, and an inspector going out also is controlling, they're able to survey multiple classes there within the inspection. So they're there that day, they could survey a class to their choosing. They could ask to survey multiple, and they know the data which is where that class is. Gotcha. So to make this survey the most useful for the inspector to provide feedback to that school that day typically, the survey, we're disrupting the class and taking away from that day. So we want maximum participation, and this is about what we can, expect a student to be able to answer right then with a, a disruption unexpectedly. So, we do have the other suggestions and realize that a more in-depth survey to other students that can be given out with ample time to go over it, not just when the 15 minutes that we're interrupting the class, would give us some more data in which to do more with. That's for sure.
And then on number 6, it might be useful to say the percentage of students who graduated from your program, so that it's not confused about, I mean, that's what the fact sheets tell you, is what percentage graduated from your program, not what percentage graduated from the school. And then in 7, I think rather than using SPFS as your abbreviation in number 6, and then you use it in the question number 7, but then in the answer you use fact sheet. I would just use fact sheet as your abbreviation. I think probably if you're reading it quickly in your student, it's more a little bit clearer to just say, oh, fact sheet, that's what was up here. And I always get confused when I'm reading and somebody puts some initials in. I go, I was supposed to have paid attention to that before, and I didn't. So.
Yeah, and we put a description at the bottom of what the acronym is and the
Right. I know.
I understand.
But yeah.
Thank you for that suggestion.
If they're like me, it might slide right by. And so you're still working on some changes to this, or this is your final version?
We will be utilizing this currently, but we are looking to expand a survey to be utilized at another time, incorporating more of the suggestions from this committee.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, one other comment, and I'm very glad to hear that you're going to start trying to reach out to former students, because most students don't realize really how good or how bad the program was until they've been out a while.
Yes, ma'am. Any other questions?
Did you have anything else, Beth?
I do not.
Anybody else in the panel have any questions? Great. Thank you both very much. Any public comment relating to what Beth just described? I think we may have one. Everyone shifts over. Is your question for Beth or? No, it's not a question. Okay. Okay.
Because I know they're not technically allowed to respond to me. My name's Angela Perry. I'm with the Institute for College Access and Success, TICAS. And I first wanted to thank everyone for being here today. This is my first comment of the day. It's late in the day for me, so thank you all for being here. And wanted to especially thank all of the Bureau staff that has given updates today. This has been really illuminating and really helpful to have some of these reports. That's been great. I did have my first comment was about the idea of data and research and creating some sort of task force or something at the Bureau to look at data and research. I want to enthusiastically endorse that idea. I think that utilizing data is really important, and it's important both for students and institutions as well as the state. I think that looking more into that data and assigning some manpower specifically to look at that would be a great idea. I also wanted to say that I was really excited about some of the changes to the student survey, especially the inclusion of graduated students. I think that that is going to be a really important data set to collect because, as Margaret mentioned, it often is not until a student has already graduated that they really come to terms with the reality of their situation. And then I did want to say one thing, which is that we've made this great progress trying to go through complaints, and we are reorganizing all kinds of things, and I'm so excited to hear about the progress that we are making in that and looking forward to more progress being made on that. And I did want to mention that I think that it would also be valuable to think about, or if there are ways that advocates or folks can help the Bureau to increase the number of inspections that are happening, both announced and unannounced, because I know that at those inspections, often inspectors find problems and raise complaints independently of students, and that in a very large number of those inspections, there are issues that are raised that would never have happened had a Bureau staff member not actually set foot on the campus. So as we think about how to process complaints and make sure that all of those problems are being addressed, I think it's also valuable to think about how we can increase that number of inspections so that we are actually having eyes on the ground and able to address some of those concerns as well. Those are my 3 things. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Angela. So it is almost 12:30. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, essentially 6 agenda items, sorry, substantive agenda items left. So for the people on the committee, do we want to take a quick 15-minute break if you want to grab a snack or something, and then we'll just come back and power through, or do people want to break and actually do like a full, half hour, 45 minutes for lunch? I think everybody's on board with the let's make this quick and move it along. Okay, so why don't we do this? It's 12:27. Why don't we just take a break until 12:45, and then that way anybody who wants to grab a snack, whatever, we can just bring it back here and keep going. Okay? It is 12:46. Everyone is back. And I know that, Diana, you have to leave at 3, right?
My flight was actually just moved back, so I can,
You got delayed?
yeah, for a
Great.
couple hours.
Okay, well, keep us updated, but I think we'll be fine either way. Yeah, let's shoot for 2. I like that. Okay, so reconvening, quorum reestablished. The next item on the agenda is 5D, licensing report with Marina, who I believe has finished her salad and can join us at the table.
Good afternoon. I was able to scarf it down in like 5 minutes. It's pretty
That
quick.
was very impressive.
When you have 2 kids, you got to eat quick. So, thank you very much for allowing me to present to you again today. It was nice seeing you all again, and I'm just going to go over the licensing statistics that provided in the last meeting. So hopefully everyone's pretty familiar with them, but I'll go one at a time because there are a few different charts in here. So I'm going to start with what I believe is the first one in your packet. I believe on page 41, attachment 5D, licensing applications status as of October 1, 2018 for fiscal year 18-19. So just to point out, these are the numbers since the beginning of 18-19, the fiscal year 18-19. So I'm just going to point out a few things on this chart. One is in the column titled Pending Assignment, Q, you'll see that there's only 7 applications pending assignment, the majority of which are new full approval applications. Those are the non-accredited applications. Those 6 are incomplete applications, so their documents were waiting from the institution in order to make it a complete application so we can continue our review of the app. And the other number I wanted to point out is in the column titled Total Pending. You'll see at the very bottom, the total pending is 232, which is lower than the last time we met and has been continued to decline, as you'll see in the box, the second box below, the middle box, where you'll see total pending applications on, and there's 3 rows. You'll see that since April, there's been a pretty significant decline in total pending applications. So that's a good sign. We obviously have a lot of pending apps, but we're still working through them, and those applications the total pending will continue to decline. That was all I was going to point out on that chart. So if you have any questions on that chart.
I have a question. Is the
Yes.
average days to approve actually to approvals only, or is it to closure, regardless of closure type?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part of your question.
Average days to approve, is that only counting approvals, or is it average days to closure?
Oh, right. It's actually to approval.
It is only to,
Yeah,
so only
right.
the
Mhm.
approved.
Right, right.
Okay, got it.
Any other questions? Okay. I'll move into the next, I'll say, set of charts. There's a lot, and basically these charts and graphs are going to cover non-accredited renewal applications and non-accredited new applications. And it's going to, they all cover applications received, completed, and pending. Again, I'm just going to point out a few items here on the first chart. I believe it's on page 42 of your packet. The new non-accredited applications 12-month overview. This gives a nice picture of just, where we've been in the last 12 months with new non-accredited applications. You'll see that the pending has significantly declined. Completed remained pretty steady, but especially, high in the last 6-7 months. And then received kind of fluctuates a little bit here and there, but really no major spikes. Has been pretty consistent as well overall. And then the other chart I wanted to point out is on page 47. It's the new non-accredited applications completed, just kind of again showing you over time, over the last 3 fiscal years, and just this part of 18-19, how completed was very high in the last 8 months because we were, working through a lot of that backlog at that time. And then you'll see on page 49, the new non-accredited applications pending review. This is a great, time lapse of where basically we had that really high number of pending applications that we worked through that backlog, and you'll see how now in 18-19 it's very low number of pending apps. But those were the only charts I was going to point out there. So if anyone had questions on any of the charts.
I have a question for you, and you may or may not be able to answer this. It looks like the number of applications that, going back to, the chart on 44, or no, maybe it was the previous one. Anyway, it looks like the number of new applications that you're receiving has been relatively low, less than 10, sort of on a monthly basis. Is that sort of, sort of from a year-over-year perspective, is that a reduction in the number of new applications than you would expect, or was that sort of on par with previous years?
It's hard to say because, as you remember with the, situation ACICS, we got a huge influx of applications, after Department of Education made that change. And so that was, that obviously contributed to the backlog, but now that that's cleared, those are through, now we're able to see, okay, is this the new norm? So I think we're kind of going to see that going forward, whether or not this is the new norm. So I think only time will tell. Okay. I mean, so far, since we've gotten through those applications, it seems like this might be the new norm. But if you look back over, let's say, the last 3 years, you'll see the applications received has crazy fluctuations. I mean, it's like a few months, it's really high, like way over 10, even sometimes, in the 20 range, and then it drops down. So it's really hard to see a pattern. But maybe this will be the new norm. So maybe, by the next meeting, we probably will have, I think in the next 6 months, I think we'll have a much better idea of whether this is just what we're going to expect from year to year now. Obviously, pending any other major change that comes along.
Right. So have you noticed any correlation between the increase in enforcement activity for non-licensed schools and resulting applications? Do you see that results in applications in?
I think it's probably too early to tell, in my opinion. I think, I hate to say it again, but probably the next, 6 months or so, I think we'll be able to see whether or not there has been an increase or not. The only thing I guess I could point out, but I don't want to say that this is there's causation here, is, we do have, looking at the very first chart I went over for the stats. For
Can you give the page?
It was page 41.
Okay, gotcha.
The applications as of October 1st, 2018. You'll see in that first column, received. You'll notice that the new and renewal applications, with the exception of renewal accredited apps, those are actually low number of applications we get. Majority of our applications are change applications. And again, this might be too early to tell. I think I'd rather see in another 6 months how it goes, but all the all the activities we've been doing, not only in enforcement, but compliance, the licensing workshops, as we, better inform our schools of what's required, I wouldn't be surprised if that led to more change applications. Hey, I didn't know I needed to submit an application for that change, and maybe the unlicensed activity as well, maybe we'll find other things, but it's possible that, as we're conducting more of that outreach and reaching out and really engaging with the schools to make sure they know, hey, this is what is required of you once you become approved, we might continue to see, those high number of change applications. It's possible. It's kind of speculative.
40 schools approved that are accredited. Is that what this is saying? And 598 that are approved that are
Correct.
non-accredited?
Yeah, sorry, I hadn't gotten to this chart yet, but that's correct.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I thought
No,
you
that's
wanted
fine.
to go through all
No,
the
it's
charts.
fine, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I honestly wasn't going to say too much more about this chart. Obviously, you can see it says total number of schools by location type and approval type. And one thing I did want to point out is that we provided this chart at the May meeting, and so I didn't include the May numbers so you can compare them to this meeting. So I'll be doing that in the future. I'll be sure to include it so you can see kind of the time, the change over time. But just, you can of course go back and look at the May, handout, but just so you know, looking at total locations, there was a very small, relatively small increase of about 15 more locations since April 30th. So a little increase in the locations since April. But from now on, I'll provide the historical too, so you can have that comparison.
So my question is on this chart, I think you say in one of the other charts that the number of schools that were offering degrees that were not accredited were 100 and some, I don't remember the precise number, that were seeking approval and going through the accreditation process. So this 598 schools that are non-accredited, those then, except for 100 and something of them, those are all schools that don't offer degrees, is that correct?
So are you saying other than I'm not sure where was the 100, do you know where that?
The applications for non-accredited schools, I thought it was non-accredited
Degree granting?
degree granting.
Margaret, I'd like to give you a clarification.
Yeah.
These are the approval types. It doesn't necessarily mean that the schools are not accredited. They chose to do the full approval process as not by means of accreditation.
I see. So they could be accredited, but went ahead and did it this way. Mm-hmm. And then I guess the other question I have, and maybe this is somewhere else also, and that is, I think I'm correct, that certain schools are not required to be under the Bureau's jurisdiction, but have voluntarily come under the Bureau's jurisdiction, basically, so they can get financial aid. It would be nice to have a breakdown of how many schools there are in that category at some point.
I'm not sure we actually track that, of the schools that are applying, which ones are required to apply with us and which ones are not. That would have to be something we'd have to look into to see if we could start tracking.
Are you talking about the schools that are under contract?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, we.
I know that
Yeah.
that list of schools
Sorry.
is on the website.
Right, yes,
Yeah.
we do
Okay.
have that, yeah. It's not in this meeting packet, but if you want it provided in the next one, we can look
Sorry,
at
if
that.
it's on the
yeah.
website, I'll find it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it gives I remember because I actually had to look a school up, and there is just a list of each institution that has a current contract with the Bureau. But they're not subject to the act, so it's really just STRIF, right, that they have to.
And other than enforcement complaints.
Right, complaints.
Right.
That's the whole purpose, really, is the complaint piece of it. Okay.
Wait, just to clarify, Margaret, are you talking about the schools that have contracted with the Bureau for purposes of just complaints, or are you talking about schools that would otherwise not be subject to the act, but maybe in 2012-13, after changes, opted to come under the Bureau from a regulatory standpoint? There's two different buckets. I think that she's talking, right, there's some schools that are not legally required to be approved by the Bureau, but have opted to do that for purposes and were granted a provision through a statutory change, I think in 2012 or 13. And then there are subsequent schools that are not under any provisions of the act, but just utilize the Bureau for purposes of complaints. So I think
I appreciate that, yeah, because I think I was thinking really of the former, the ones that came under the full jurisdiction voluntarily. And is that listed anywhere?
I don't think we track that. I would have to look back and see if we have any historical information on it, but not to my.
I think they would just be included in your approved
Yeah,
institutions.
yeah.
They probably wouldn't have identified them otherwise.
Okay.
Yeah.
Those poor sets. Okay.
Yeah, so if there's any other questions on any of the charts?
So I just want to say how happy it made me to go to the Bureau website and see the how long or which month's worth of applications we were reviewing, and seeing that none of them were from 2017 anymore. So congratulations to, I know that when you took this on, that you had quite the log to just an awesome job of getting caught up. So
Well, I can't take too much credit because Robert had already gotten the ball rolling before I started, and it's really the staff that did all the work. I mean, they worked really hard. They worked overtime. So it's really, their credit due. But I did, just to a little disclaimer on the 2017. So it's possible to run into that with the incomplete application. So
Right.
if the incomplete app becomes complete, that was from 2017, because they have 1 year, it can be deficient before it's abandoned. So it is possible that could. I just wanted to throw.
But just when you get on
Yeah,
and it's
sure.
like, we're reviewing non-accredited applications from, August
Right.
2018. I was like, yes,
Yeah.
so great. So congratulations to you and for Robert for laying the track that got us here. So
Okay, thank you.
And lastly, I also want to give kudos to Marina and the work that she's doing in helping us provide some staffing for the enforcement. I think that's awesome, and I appreciate you doing that. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
thank you. Yeah, all of a sudden the wind started to blow. Next up is item E, Robert, for quality of education. Oh, I'm sorry. Was there any public comment prior to? No? Okay. Sorry about that. I was busy eating. I lost track of time. Welcome, Robert.
Hello, everybody. Robert Bales, Education Administrator. I have attachment 5E, and I'm going to be talking about the schools that were impacted by Senate Bill 1247. This report is very similar to the report I provided last time. I don't think it was the last meeting, probably the meeting before that. But I would ask the committee if the information that I'm providing is something that you want on an ongoing basis, or if there's other information that you want related to Senate Bill 1247 and the unaccredited schools that are trying to become accredited. I can provide that info, but I'm going to go through the info that I did provide today. So we're looking at two buckets here. The top bucket are the schools that, as of January 1st, 2015, were approved by the Bureau already. They were already offering degree programs and were not accredited. So the Bureau reached out to 141 schools that we identified in that category at that time. And of the 141, the list at the bottom kind of shows what happened to each one. 108 schools decided that they did want to become accredited. They did submit an accreditation plan, and their intent was to become accredited. And 50 of those at the very bottom are currently in accreditation candidacy status. So they met the deadline of July 1st, 2017 to become pre-accredited, and they are progressing toward accreditation. So we're monitoring those schools to their July 1st, 2020 date, where they have to become fully accredited. Any questions on that group?
So, Robert, of the original 141 that you contacted, 69 of them are either in accreditation they're either accredited or in candidacy status now?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, 19 have become accredited and 50 are working toward accreditation.
Okay.
The bottom bucket of schools are the schools that were approved after January 1st, 2015, and these are the provisionally approved schools. We have 36 of those right now that have been approved to offer up to 2 degree programs and are seeking accreditation. So We're tracking those as well. 36 over a 4-year period, what is that, an average of, 9 or so? It's 8 per year. So we continue to get applications for those schools to be provisionally approved. And then we monitor them throughout their accreditation process as well. They have 2 years to become pre-accredited and 5 years to become accredited, with the option of requesting a 2-year extension. As of right now, we have one provisionally approved school that has had its degree program suspended. We've had a hearing, and we're waiting for the results of that hearing.
Is that it?
That
Are you
is
going to
it.
talk about the student outcomes requirements for WASC
I am.
and DEAC?
Yep.
Okay.
It's kind of a separate issue. I'm
Yeah,
waiting
I
for
open my
permission to
folder,
talk
pull out
about
my
that.
stuff.
Okay, so a comment was made or a question was made about accreditation. We talked a little bit about accreditation last meeting, and I guess there was some concern over the 2 accreditors that seem very popular with these schools who are seeking accreditation, and one of them is WASC, the other is DEAC, which is a Distance Education Accreditation Commission. And so what I did was I kind of went back. I didn't want to give too much information at that point in time, but I went back and looked at the accreditation standards for both of those accreditors. WASC, one of the requirements in WASCs in the standard is the institution has to create a robust system to analyze retention and graduation rates and to identify strategies to make improvements. So while they don't have a specific minimum expectation or minimum benchmark for retention or graduation, or same thing really, they do require that the school has some type of system to be continuously looking at those rates and identifying them against industry standards. Their standard 1.2 says the institution regularly generates, evaluates, and makes public data about student achievement, including measures of retention, graduation, and evidence of student learning. And then DEAC has established benchmark completion and graduation rates by type and level of program. Non-degree program completion rate benchmark is 60%. Bachelor's degree completion rate benchmark is 43%. So I just wanted to share that with the group, with the committee. And then regardless of the accreditor, all institutions, whether they're approved by means of accreditation or are considered to be fully approved, they all have to meet our minimum operating standards anyway. So, we still make sure that they meet all the operating standards of the Bureau.
I think my question when I raised that was whether the lack of a placement standard in WASC, lack of a graduation standard and lack of a placement standard in WASC. And then, now in the DEAC, did you say say again what their placement standard was?
DEAC's placement standard or completion standard, I don't have the placement. The completion rate benchmark is 60% for non-degree programs, and for a bachelor's degree program, it's 43%.
Yeah, my question was really whether the larger number of schools coming in who had an accredited agency that didn't really track that, if the Bureau had any thought that might increase the Bureau's work in trying to see that they were reporting their placement accurately or their completion accurately.
Well, all schools that are approved by the Bureau have to submit their school performance fact
Right.
sheets as part of their annual report. So
Right.
we always have the data on all schools, regardless of what accreditor they have. I'll just say that, in working with accreditors, again, being on the other side, on the school side, and working with several different accreditors, I know that WASC is pretty tough. They're not an easy accreditor. And although schools initially may select WASC, what we're finding is if I look at the schools that are currently approved by the Bureau that are accredited, and I look at which accreditors there are and do kind of an analysis, WASC is not at the top of the list. So it tells me that they may start with WASC, but may not complete that process, because WASC is very tough. It's a 5-year minimum accreditation process.
So you don't see that the numbers becoming WASC accredited is not necessarily ultimately going to increase that much, even though many of these schools did initially apply there?
Correct.
And how about the distance education?
Distance education, it's still pretty popular just because it's of the nature of it being for distance education, and there's just there's a move for institutions to start programs through distance education.
Thank you.
And if I remember right off the top of my head, I believe that in order to be eligible for DEAC accreditation, you have to have more than half of your programs online.
Correct.
So
51%.
that obviously limits, for some schools, the options. But to Robert's point, having gone through the WASC approval process from start to finish, it takes a long time. And I think a lot of schools underestimate that because they know for nationals it might be 2 to 3. With WASC, it's 5 to 9. So it is a much different process then. As you, Joseph, are well aware.
No comment.
Yeah, I plead the fifth.
Yeah, there are fewer than 5, certainly. Proprietary schools are accredited by WASC.
Yeah, it is arduous. Any questions from the panel for Robert and the education quality? No? Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Oh, you're still up. Next up, is there any public comment on the education quality unit report? And now you can get up. Next up, item F, Bureau's IT system project report with Robert and a special guest.
All right, so I'm really pleased to actually provide this report. I know I gave some information at the last meeting, but it wasn't official because it wasn't on the agenda. So I'm happy to report about it. Jason is also going to talk a little bit about kind of what we're doing. And I didn't provide a written report because it's just kind of a lot of dates at this point, and I thought I would explain it. But we already talked about doing our business process maps. We did the Bureau did put together business process maps for like 73 of our processes during September 2017 and February of this year. Then we went back and we mapped our could-be processes, so what our processes would look like had we had a perfect IT system that could support what we do. And that was February to April of 2018. Our Stage 1 business analysis was submitted to the California Department of Technology April 10th of 2018. It was approved May 10th with no changes, which was a good thing. We started our market research May 11th, very next day. We had a Stage 2 kickoff meeting with California Department of Technology August 30th. And we produced a mid-level functional requirements document October 8th, which kind of outlined what we were looking for in an IT system to support our business processes. October 16th, we had a request for information go out, which went to the vendors that might be interested in providing an IT support system for us. Yesterday was the last day to accept vendor responses, so those have all come into OIS. The 8th and 9th will be a review of those responses, and then between November and December, we'll probably continue to do some system demos with the ultimate goal of selecting a vendor for our IT system by the end of the year. Jason can probably speak more about the process, but it's a stage gate process, so there are 4 stages, and so I feel like we're kind of halfway there. We've identified all our requirements, and now we're looking for a vendor to support or to be able to provide a system that will do all the things that we hope it will do. Did I miss anything, Jason?
I don't think so. My name is Jason Piccioni. I'm the Chief Information Officer for your bureau as well as the Department of Consumer Affairs. And are there any questions regarding what Robert said? Can I expand on the PAL process at all, or are we all good with that?
Will you be elaborating on Dr. Marion's earlier comment about intermediate steps?
I absolutely will.
Okay,
That's
thank you.
my main purpose for being here, really.
Thank you.
I will say that the STEPS activities that Robert spoke to represent a huge amount of work, a huge leap in evolution for the Bureau's business process, documentation of business process, and evolution toward an appropriate, efficient, and effective technology system to serve all of your business needs. I can say that with a little bit of experience because I was hired in my first state position in 1999 with the Bureau for Private Postsecondary and Vocational Education. So I've been around a little bit, and the work that the staff have done behind the leadership of Dr. Marion and Lisa has been really, really phenomenal. So all the activities that Robert talked about really represent tons of work, tons of hours of staff hours to get to the point where we're at to make appropriate decisions for the future. But I will talk about now what Dr. Marion mentioned. Dr. Marion mentioned the schedule, the proposed schedule looks to 2021 for a system, which is still a little ways away. So what we've done, again, with the leadership of Dr. Marion and Lisa, is shown that is identified that your bureau right now is full of change agents with your counsel, your in your role, as well as Dr. Marion. We felt that with as much change agents as there are in the bureau, we needed to identify components that we can rip off in chunks from the holistic project to reach interim value steps along the way. The first one, which I'll turn this way and say, go ahead and bring it up. The first one, the first value proposition we looked at was your annual reports process, the annual collection of lots of data from your institutions.
Ooh, this is fancy.
Yes.
We don't have to crane our necks, we can actually see it. This is great.
So we looked at where are some of the pain points, where can we componentize system function, business functionality, and adopt an interim system? Where can we implement interim functionality in a system while still working towards the holistic 2021 system? Annual reports, the data collection is where we landed. And what you're looking at is a prototype, purely a prototype, which we're targeting December 15th to start the data collection for the 2017 annual reports. We've been working with your annual reports unit. Again, I heard Marcus Dawson's name mentioned several times. He's definitely been critical, as well as the staff within that unit, and Beth Scott. We focused on 3 ideas with this piece, as well as with the holistic picture. How do we make efficient, effective civic engagement? How do your institutions engage with you effectively? How can your staff efficiently work on the workload so that timelines can be reduced and backlogs can be eliminated? And how can we get the information that we collect to the consumer population, to the student population, quickly and appropriately? And I think I'll show 3 areas where this annual report data collection system will help. So first, just like most systems, you log into it. So if we can go ahead and log in. And again, I just remind you that this is a prototype, so there will be things that change before the go live target date of mid-December. So an institution user would log into this system, and they would come to their dashboard. And the first thing they would do is create an institution data profile. They'd click the drop down, choose that guy there, and then hit create. And I'm not going to suggest that this data entry screen is anything rocket science phenomenal. Although I will have Keith scroll down to the bottom and say that all of this data, really lots of data that the schools have to produce. That save button next to the submit button, if there's anybody who has submitted the institution annual reports before, that save button will be a huge time saver. And in prior years, all this data that had to be submitted in one fell swoop. There was no save feature, so the person had to be very ready and to complete the entire thing. So just like normal systems, we can now have someone come in, start the institution data and save it, continue on later, tomorrow, next week, etc. Can you click back to the dashboard, Keith, please?
Can I just tell you, you cannot underestimate how life-changing that is for the schools, because especially if you have a ton of programs and a lot of data, it could take 3 days to put all that in there.
Absolutely.
So thank you on behalf of everybody.
We absolutely looked at where those pain points were and tried to do that. So I don't want to belabor the point. The system allows you to enter, save, and submit your institution data, program data, branch and satellite data, all things required for the annual report, and submit it to the Bureau. One thing that I can't show you today, just for lack of time, is once the annual report submission gets to the Bureau staff, the system will allow a back and forth, I'll say conversation, to where an analyst can say, your program economics is not sufficient and you didn't complete it. So electronically, the institution will receive a notification saying your program X needs to be completed. Please do so. They can fill in the omitted information and submit, and then it immediately returns back to the Bureau staff for analysis and review and completion. That with all the information that we get, we can go back and forth in that conversation to a much more efficient and effective and quick analysis and submission review. The end of that, I mentioned effective civic engagement from the institutions. I mentioned effective and efficient processing from the analyst staff. And the last is when the annual reports are collected and finalized, getting that information out to the consumer and student population quickly and effectively. And what we've done, Keith, can you bring up the website, please? This is a 2015 annual report summary. If you could scroll down to the bottom. This chart here is representative of the information, very summary information of the schools that submit the annual report, along with links to their performance fact sheet and catalog. This information will be dynamically created on a web page like this as the annual reports are submitted and finalized by Bureau staff. So this data list will not wait until all annual reports are completed and submitted and reviewed and then posted in one fell swoop. It will be dynamic throughout the annual report submission and review process, which just gets the data out to the people that it's supposed to help in a quicker fashion. And then the data that we pass through, if you could scroll up to the top, please. Ultimately, this data will follow suit and be made available quicker, more effective, and in a less staff resource intense manner.
And so let me jump in and first off give Jason and Robert a ton of kudos in regards to managing this process. While this is the first time I've went to an extensive process like this, Robert has definitely made sure that we are on target, and I just want to thank you publicly in doing that. And Jason has been excellent in being able to be attentive to some of those things that we need done. Obviously, the website was a big thing in pushing that. Now this ARU system, which is going to be beneficial as well. And I think as much as I would love it to have a brand new system today, you definitely and your team have been attentive to us, and I really appreciate that.
I have a comment, question. I noticed on the annual report page, not the summary, but the annual report page, right towards the bottom, there was something in there about the Bureau recommends that the school put their catalog and something else in the performance fact sheet in a section of their website, something along those lines. One problem that I have seen with school websites is they will often have something way down at the bottom of the page, you have to scroll down to, that says disclosures. And the only way you can get to the, like, let's say I want to take a cosmetology course. The only way I can find out the performance for that cosmetology program is to search through the web and find this thing down at the bottom that says disclosures. And yep, sure enough, there's a whole bunch of things there that are required to be disclosed. But to be useful to the student, it would be helpful if I go to the business administration program and I'm looking at the business administration program and I can easily click with one link to the performance fact sheet for that program. I don't need the performance fact sheets for all the different programs, and I don't need to search around the website to do that. So before you get too far along with this, I would say, think about how that really, what instructions you want to be giving, because I don't think we want students to have to search and find, oh, this is where all those nasty or ridiculous disclosures are tucked. They need to get to those from the program that they're looking at. So just has nothing to do with, well, it has to do with what you're saying, but talking about getting the information out to the consumer, this is a really, really important part of it. And just saying, lump these all together in the same place is not helpful to students.
So, counterpoint, which, like the old Saturday Night point, counterpoint. The requirement under statute is that it be included on the homepage. So what most schools have done to comply with that is put it in the footer of their page so it appears on every page. So no matter what page you're on, it's in the footer. That way you don't have to have links to it on 50 different pages. And so I understand what Margaret is saying, that it would be more useful to students if it's attached to the program. By statute, it's required on the homepage, and if it's on your homepage and you put it in the footer, it is on every page. It just happens to be at the bottom. So it might, there is nothing by statute that says you have to put it anywhere else, unlike the gainful employment regulations where it is required on multiple pages, but even in that case, what most schools do is they put it in the footer, and that way you never have to worry that it's missing from a page where it's required because it's always there. So
this probably needs to be a subject of discussion at another meeting, because there are some real problems with, the only reason I ever look down at the bottom of the page is to find the contact us, and then I'm surprised if there's anything else useful there. So anyway, maybe a topic for next time. And something to think about as you're going forward with this process.
Any other questions I can answer? Thank you.
Thank you, Mina. She's like, public comment. I got it. Any public comment on the IT project? All right. Next up is a report from OSAR. Welcome, Scott.
Good afternoon. Used to saying good morning.
Not today.
Scott Valverde, Chief of the Office of Student Assistance and Relief, and I'm happy to be in front of you today to update you on our 5 agendized items under the OSAR update. So I'll be covering G1 through 5 on the agenda. The only item that has a handout is G1, which is the Student Tuition Recovery Fund claims and large impact closure statistics, which will be we'll go over first and speak to attachment 5F. I believe it's page 57 of your packet. The rest will just be verbal updates, and I believe G3, Christy will be giving the status update on that one. So without further ado, a couple things I want to draw your attention to on the STRIF claims summary. First of all, that the period of time that's covered by this chart is beginning of the fiscal year, July 1, 2018, through the date at which the data was drawn down, which is through October 16th, 2018, so a little bit more than the first fiscal quarter. And we've got 93 at the top of the chart, 93 new STRIF claims that have come in, which is about 30 per month, which is a pace which is holding steady with what we saw in the first year of OSAR, fiscal year 17-18. In fact, a lot of the stats, sort of an overarching comment, are very consistent in terms of monthly pace based on what we saw last year, which is sort of an update in of itself, I guess. Similarly, 35 claims closed during this time period, 32 which have been paid out. Again, approximately about 10 claims per month, approximately $10,000 per claim for the $325,000 paid out so far in this fiscal year. So as you can see, following the math, we do have sort of a trend where we've got approximately 30 claims coming in per month and approximately 10 per month where that the Bureau is approving. So if you're following that logic down to the third chart, current claims in our workload, that number has increased from the last report that we provided, where it was about 425. There's approximately 470, not approximately, exactly 470 as of this date, where claims were actively being worked by OSAR staff and or provided to the Bureau with our summary of efforts and the recommendation still pending at that point. Does that make sense? Proud of the 0 claims in the queue number, that's particularly in light of the fact that our office technician position is currently vacant and has been vacant for a little while. We're working on filling that as we speak, actually. But so it's reflective of staff really stepping up and all hands on deck in terms of the front end processing that's required to get claims into the queue and being worked, out of the queue, I'm sorry, and being worked. The next key figure there is the current fund balance as of that date, $26 million. And if you look at the trend in the historical fund balances, again, we went down by about approximately $1.2 million last fiscal year. And if, again, you project that pace of claims being paid going out at $325,000 in the first approximate quarter, we're about on the same pace, a little ahead, looking at about $1.3 million projected as a payout on our current pace. And then the last thing I'd draw your attention to is the second page, which is the large impact closures. A couple things to highlight there. You know, as far removed as we are from the Corinthians closures at this point, you do still see claims from students of Heald, Wyotek, and Everest still coming in, new claims coming in, although obviously it's a relatively small number, 10 of the 93 that were received to date in this quarter. But you know, our outreach efforts to those students are still ongoing, and we are still seeing those claims come in. Unlike ITT, as you can see, 0 new claims received in the quarter, and we're down to a number of 28 current ITT claims in process. So that hopefully will be a data element that will soon drop off this report as they will all have been pushed through. Corinthians, on the other hand, we still have about 100, exactly 103 actually as of this date, claims still in process. So that's the large impact closures and where we're at with STRIF. Do we have any other questions before we move on to G2?
I have a question on the STRIF claims where, if anywhere, are the claims that have come in but have not been paid because the Bureau is waiting to see if the student will get their loan discharged by the feds?
If those are still open, they would be captured in the 213 number in the middle chart. Those would be claims where we are...
I'm sorry, which chart?
The first page, the middle box, current claims.
Okay.
So those would all still be open, and they would be open under the category that we were calling Analyst First Review Complete and Recommendation Pending.
So on the Heald, Wyotek, and Everest on the second page,
yep,
where would they be in that chart?
Which numbers are you referring to? I'm sorry, the 10?
I don't know which numbers. That's what I'm asking you.
Okay.
Suppose it's an Everest claim that's come in, and what's happening is the recommendation is pending. Where does it show up in this chart?
That would be under STRIF claims in progress on the bottom of the second page.
Okay, but it's not broken out as to ones where you're waiting for the feds?
No, it's not really a way we track that data. We could look at extracting it that way, but it's not the way we flag the work. We don't really have it tracked that way specifically.
So some of those have been waiting for years now, right? For the feds?
I could also pull up what the oldest date is, of any of the pending claims. I don't have that at my fingertips.
Yeah.
Many of these are still claims. A high percentage of them are claims that were submitted to the Bureau prior to OSAR coming online, and then now we're working at various stages.
Right, but you're still, if they might qualify for a closed school discharge.
We are not closing them,
You're
yes.
not closing them, you're not handling them, they're just sort of waiting.
We make routine contact with the student to make sure we haven't missed anything, that any other way we can help them. Their status is still the same. So we're in constant contact with all the ones that are pending.
Scott, you're not getting information from the department directly on those, are you? Like if a student has applied for a closed school discharge and also
They don't-
STRIF?
Yeah, we have to find out generally from the student.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, wouldn't it make your workload a little easier?
So without any other questions, G2 was a request that was made from the committee last time, which was the recommendation was really made and I thought it was a good recommendation. I still think it's a good recommendation to look at the data that we collect and the data that we summarize and then provide to you, not only the raw data, the number of claims, the number of claims approved and the dollar amount, but to look at those figures as a percentage of what we see as the potential outstanding STRIF liability that's out there generally. So in other words, not only what we're doing, but what we're doing and how much headway we're making into what the total possible STRIF liability unpaid that's sort of out there based on closures to date. And I guess my update there is it's created a lot of good internal conversations about just looking at our data, forward thinking and more projection and sort of trend type data. It raises some interesting questions about the possibility of the forthcoming IT system as well. And in general, I like the idea. It's just that, as I mentioned last time, and I'll say again, we're 15 months into our existence, and we have our first 2 reports to the legislature are due by January 1, and will be based on the statutorily required reporting requirements and those data elements to be able to meet those requirements. So that's kind of where our focus is and our priority is. But I haven't forgotten the recommendation, and at every turn where data comes up, including Dr. Marion's discussion about a possible data reporting unit, I haven't forgotten about that. It's just that I don't have it to provide yet. We have some concerns about exactly how we would quantify and calculate what that potential outstanding liability would be based on some significant assumptions that would need to be made that I would be concerned about the amount and depth of those assumptions really sort of chipping away at what the intent of the data request was. So I know it's a long-winded way of saying I don't have an actual response to provide to that specific request in terms of numbers. It's definitely on our radar. Any questions? I think without any questions, G3, Christy was going to provide an update on the request about the duties of OSAR as it relates to the Bureau and STRIF.
So this request was made at the last advisory committee meeting, and we are working on it. It's just due to workload, I wasn't able to provide it at this meeting. So I hope to have that information for you available at the next committee meeting. Thank you.
All right, moving on to G4. This was a request that was made to provide to you all of our consumer handouts and outreach materials, collateral that we provide to students and prospective students. And through our liaison, we did provide to you at the time was our handout and PowerPoint presentation that we have used up to this point. I am not aware of any feedback that any of the committee members have provided or questions, but I'd be happy to answer those now. My update to this section would be number one, and I kind of, I don't know if warned or admonished is the right word, but I'd mentioned in previous updates that those are definitely going to be dynamic documents as we continue to work with all of our statutory partners and those who help us directly and indirectly on outreach content. So we're continually making changes such as updating URLs and new resources that we become aware of that would be helpful to students. So it is a fluid document. I think the PowerPoint that we provided last time provides a basic foundation of our message that we're still using that has been augmented significantly as we move forward. So again, we're happy to provide an updated version of that if you'd like to see that. We've also very recently worked with the Office of Public Affairs on some new collateral material in the form of a trifold handout that we're providing to students about researching colleges, researching potential colleges, and also aligns a lot with some of the talking points that are in the PowerPoint that we provided after the last meeting. So we can also give you that as well. That's kind of hot off the press. And then the other thing I'd like to mention is, the use of those materials is ongoing and is expanding as well. So we continue to provide those materials in a variety of different spaces in which we engage with prospective students, specifically our ongoing relationship with the Department of Veteran Affairs through the CalTAP program for exiting servicemen and women who are looking at using their GI benefits and considering private post-secondary institutions. That's one space. We continue to participate in quite a few events targeted towards K through 12 students and families in the forms of college fairs and things like that. We engage with students in a lot of ways, and the newest, hottest off the press is we also put on our first OSAR sponsored, OSAR delivered, OSAR developed event in the form of a college preparation workshop for students recently on October 27th that we're quite proud of as well. We had prospective students, high school students, family members, parents, foster parents, representatives of the California Student Aid Commission, community colleges, and some of our other partners through the SETA program as well were there. Dr. Marion, guest speaker, and all of our staff were there to put this on as sort of a pilot, and we look forward to using the handouts and other developed materials moving forward to sort of expand that component of our outreach arm, if you will. Any questions on that?
I want to give kudos to the staff that's here that helped put that on with Scott. I think you guys all did an amazing job, and I think this is the right direction in regards to what we want to do with the Office of Student Relief. All right?
Can you keep the advisory committee updated on upcoming events so that if we wanted to sit in on one, we could do that?
Absolutely, yeah. We keep our outreach calendar pretty well updated on our website. There's quite a few things going on. In fact, we have an event just this evening in San Diego at the San Diego Community College District. It was a resource fair that kind of came as an outgrowth of a closure of a private post-secondary institution. And the Black College Expo is coming up in Sacramento soon. We have the Cash for College event, which is a huge event in LA. And as I said, many others, and hopefully more that will be being spearheading as well. So the website is very kept like almost in real time and as close as possible, and we can definitely provide those to you before the next meeting as well. G5 is the yes.
Real quick,
I'm sorry.
doesn't the Bureau have listserv where you send out notice? Because I got a notice of your college.
Yeah, we put it out. Thank you for reminding me of that.
Email.
Yeah, so we do a DCA blast for our events as well. We did that. We put it out on our social media as well, internally through the Bureau. So we're looking at expanding that as well. Yeah.
Do you have to sign up for OSAR's email blast separately? Because I don't recall ever getting one, and I do get
It's
other.
OSAR specific.
Yeah, do you
Yeah.
have to go in and actually tick a box? Yeah.
That's the way you do it, right?
Okay.
It's a
All right.
subscription, yeah.
Okay, I'll have
Yeah.
to look it up. Thanks.
Okay. G5 is the Bureau's use of STRIF eligibility category for students enrolled more than 120 days before the closure or discontinuation of a program. This is piggybacking on an earlier discussion in today's meeting, and again was brought up at the previous a meeting as a request to sort of agendize a discussion of how and how often, and sort of a verification that we do, in fact, when reviewing applications for STRIF, look at those eligibility categories as well, outside of that 120-day window from the school closure, as we discussed this morning. So I think my first overarching statement is, again, OSAR's role in reviewing STRIF claims and assisting students in verifying their eligibility for STRIF, and then summarizing those recommendations and moving them on to the Bureau Deputy Chief and Chief for the final decision. In doing that process, we systematically build in a review where we look at every pathway to eligibility, including those outside the 120-day window, across the board. So it's really not a what's the word I'm looking for? It's not that we look at the review of a claim from the outset as this is a claim that's either inside or outside of the 120-day window. We look at across the board all pathways for eligibility, whether it be the discontinuation of a program, whether it be a clear economic loss suffered based on being enrolled within the 120-day window, or considering on a case-by-case basis whether there was a significant decline in the quality or value of the education program as well. So we already do that. The question and I think the request for this being agendized was really a discussion about how we do that and how often we do that. The how often we do it has been a tricky request just because, again, similar to Margaret's prior question, it's not really the way we have up to this point and up to the point that recommendation was made. It's not really the way we track the work. We don't really log it in that way. We don't really have something within our data system where we sort of separately identify under which provisions of the statute the recommendation for approval was made. But so this was really a task of staff sort of rolling up their sleeves and digging in and looking at individual files to do the best we could to come up with a number for you, and which, again, I do have to have an approximate qualifier because of what I just said. But since OSAR's come online, we have made recommendations for approval of STRIF claims in approximately 7 cases where it would fall under one of those categories I mentioned, either the discontinuation of a program, other students deemed eligible, or the significant decline in the quality of ed. The how is I can speak to a little bit more. Again, it's a case-by-case basis. It's driven by looking at all pathways for eligibility. Hopefully there are pathways, and generally there are, that are a little bit more clear in the statute and regs than something like significant decline in quality without any regulatory structure behind that clause. But once we get there, then we would do things like looking at any complaints, any aspects of the claim in which the student identified that there were problems either with the faculty or the delivery of the instruction or whatever the issue may be. We would obviously work in close concert with enforcement on that as well to ensure that we're, for lack of a better word, turning over every stone. Any questions on that?
I'm sorry, you said of those 7 cases, they included a program being discontinued or someone from more than 120 days before the school closed, and I think you mentioned a 3rd category, which I didn't catch.
The significant decline in the quality or value of the program being discontinued, and then there's another clause that says other students deemed eligible.
And of those 7, are there some in each of those 3 categories?
We're working on reconciling that. I'm sorry, like I said, it's not really the way we track it, but I think we're working towards having a way to more systematically categorize that. I don't have the exact figure, so I'd be uncomfortable saying that, but I believe there was at least 1 in each of the 3. Any other questions?
All right. Everybody good
Last
on
chance.
the OSAR update? Okay. Thank you,
all.
Scott.
Thank
Public comment before Mina tells me to ask for public comment. All right, great. Moving right along. So next on the agenda would be 6, 7, and 8, which we already covered. So that takes us to item 9, which is the income share agreement status update, which I assume is Nina.
That's just basically to acknowledge that there was a request by the committee for more formal legal opinion on how the current Bureau's laws and regulations work with the income sharing agreement. So that's being worked on and will be provided at the next meeting.
Okay. Thank you. Public comment? Because I know she's going to tell me to ask for public comment. Okay. Since there was no update, I guess there's nothing to comment on. Item 10, discussion related to the Bureau becoming the lead agency addressing industry problems, staffing location of Bureau offices, which I believe was a Margaret request from the last meeting. Is that you, Dr. Marion, or? Discussion. Oh, discussion. Okay. I didn't know if there was anything to report out on this one. So discussion. Margaret, would you care to lead the discussion?
Well, actually, what I would ask for was some input from staff about some of these issues. I had raised the issue of Bureau locations so that you have people who can do inspections closer to their locations, particularly there's nobody in Southern California, would save staff time. Maybe you could get more inspections done. And my question was, is that something you've looked into? What are your thoughts about it from the Bureau? And as far as, when I say the lead agency, I mean, so it seems to me the Bureau should be the one that's finding out about the problems before the AG or anybody else, really. And again, my question was asking for input from the staff about, what their views are, your views are as to, am I wrong? Or if I'm not wrong, what can be done, what changes can we recommend so that, in fact, the Bureau is really more, I guess I hate the word, but proactive, the one that's really finding out what's going on and addressing it before it turns into a gigantic problem. So, and of course, and tied to that, the issue about, since licensing seems to be all caught up, can there be a more permanent shift of personnel to deal with complaints and inspections where we desperately need people? So I was hoping to hear input from the Bureau and the different, the enforcement people, the licensing people, the inspection people, whoever, about, what have you looked at, what have you thought about, what are your views on this, and just to get some idea, is there a problem, and if so, what are people thinking that we could do to address it?
I think it was misunderstood. I thought we were having a discussion about it. So any recommendations you would or the committee would like to give us, we're open to taking in. And yeah.
Well, my recommendation would be for the next meeting that we have a freewheeling discussion starting with the director, legal staff, enforcement staff, anybody who has some information that could be provided to us or opinion. How would this affect inspections? Let's talk to Beth or someone about, how would this affect inspections? And maybe someone here says, well, this is what we think it might cost us, and this is what we would save, and this is how much more it would cost us. What would be the problems? Let's look at this. Let's look at the things that we might be able to do so that the Bureau is really on the forefront, not just bringing up the rear. Why hasn't the Bureau been that way, or has it? Tell me. Let me hear from everybody who has any input on that. And I would hope it would be that people could feel free to speak freely and that they wouldn't feel constrained that, I can't say that because my supervisor's here or whatever. That's kind of what I'm looking for. And then we could have some discussion, but I think we need that input. It seems to me reasonable you have staff located where the schools are. But I don't know what the finances are. I don't know what the availability of office space is. I don't know how much it might save, how much it might cost. Are there other ideas for how we catch up on the inspections and the complaint handling like has been done on the licensing? And not only catch up in closing complaints, but in actually getting to things and getting the problem stopped before it mushrooms.
Right. And so maybe I'm misunderstanding, but I think that's I think this is the opportunity for the advisory committee to provide us some of those ideas. I think we're open to hearing anything that anybody has. I think we just did a presentation on everything that's going on with the Bureau, so I would welcome input. Yes, we can come back and provide additional information like we did today, but I think this is the opportunity to have the discussion, to be able to talk about things that you would recommend or you would like to see.
Margaret, if I could interject quickly. So I think in part what might be helpful is clarification. You just described two very different things. One being catching up with fulfilling the current mandate, right? So being behind on a complaint resolution or increasing site visits and so forth is one category, which I feel like we've heard a lot of information of what they're trying to do to move that ball forward. But then separately, there's the concept of becoming what are really subjective terms about being the lead agency or being proactive or being like, those are difficult to measure, right? And potentially not included actually in the statute, right? Like what is, can you be more specific in what you're wanting to see from the Bureau?
As far as inspections and complaint handling, the two things that I have raised before that I would like to hear some response on is, would it make sense, would it be helpful to set up a branch office of the Bureau in Southern California, for example? That's one thing. Would it be helpful to readjust staffing on a permanent basis so that you have more staffing dealing with inspections and complaint handling and fewer dealing with licensing? Although I know, now that you're all caught up on licensing, you don't want to feel like you want to move people around. But that's where we need to have some focus. Okay. Those are a couple of ideas that might facilitate that. I don't know. Maybe there's some other ideas that could come from staff who are working with this on a day-to-day basis. If we had X, we could do this better, we could do it faster, whatever. Those are a couple of things. And then as far as, being the agency that figures out what's going wrong before it gets to the case of a federal case or a state prosecution, the statute, I think everything in the statute is meant to accomplish that. But in fact, although, I'm hearing reports and it sounds like people are really trying their best and doing a good job, where they can, and you've had staffing issues and when the agency started, you had to get the regulations done and so forth. But at this point, I don't see that the Bureau is finding the problems before they become gigantic. And I'd like to know, what are your thoughts as to why that's not happening? What is it that we should, what is it that you need from us? What is it you need from the legislature so that this actually happens? Because it doesn't matter how many complaints you close or how many inspections you're doing if that isn't all with the goal of actually stopping the bad schools, making sure that students are taken care of and so on. Okay. So I don't know if does that clarify what I'm... And I guess the other part of that would be, that's my impression. If I'm wrong and you're really out there stopping folks, I know you put these things on the website, but we looked at that recently and it's not by date, so it's hard to see, well, how are they doing this better, when you do an inspection and a referral and so forth. Give us something to go on to say, look, this is how we're doing it now and this is what results we've been having.
I think one thing that is happening that we don't talk about at the meetings, and I know this because I represent lots of schools that get them, is the actual disciplinary actions that are taking place. So citations that are issued, orders of abatement. There's a lot of that going on, and we don't really talk about that at the meetings. And it's not, I don't think we would expect that you'd be coming in saying, here are the 5 schools that we did this to. But that is happening because I am frequently getting calls when that happens. So I do feel like there is a concerted effort with the Bureau to make sure that they're being as proactive as possible. The other thing to think about too is that the statute, that is, I think, the intent of the statute is to make sure that the Bureau has the power to identify and take action pursuant to the statute and regulations in response to those things. So I think to your point, Margaret, we probably are not hearing as much about that piece of it in these meetings as maybe we could, to give us a sense of, outside of complaints and outside of things that are sort of whether it's internally generated or dealing with student complaints, how many institutions were issued a citation for unauthorized operation? How many institutions were issued a citation for a material violation? It doesn't have to be details, but it gives you a sense of how many of those things are going on, because those are what I would consider to sort of be the precursors, right, for potential problem children, and how are we dealing with that? And that might be helpful to get a little bit more detail on. But at the end of the day, the statute is what it is, and the Bureau only has so much power to take action, right? I mean, you issue your citations, you issue your orders of abatement, you refer things to the AG's office. Those are the activities that you have to. Those are the things you have to do. So unless the Bureau has provided some additional, police power, there's only so much that the Bureau can do about that. So I think maybe as part of that discussion is, understanding on our side how that is being addressed. And to Margaret's question, if it is happening and we're just not talking about it, then let's talk about it, so that we can feel that that is happening. And I know from my side how many of my, how many new clients I've gotten in the past year and a half who are schools that were operating without authorization, and helping them through the process and helping them become compliant. And that in most cases, my take has been that if they're calling me because they've received a citation for unauthorized operation and they want to apply and become compliant, that's the goal. You want the schools to become compliant. And so that is another thing that I think is helpful for us to understand is, how many of the orders of abatement for unauthorized operation has resulted in an application, and are schools making an effort to become compliant? Because I think that helps to sort of identify where your work is resulting in good responsive action, and where if that isn't happening, then what? Then what do you do? And I think maybe that might just be more of a process discussion, like what happens at that point, and how long do you let a school hang out there before you have to take some additional action, and then what happens when you do? I think that's valuable.
I think there's an example of that you can draw from your current work product. Ms. Johnson presents a bulleted list of student impact. We say these are the good work done, and it's viewed very much through a student lens, and you could do something very similar in terms of disciplinary action, like take a negative institutional view and say these are the bad cop parts, right? And so you can look at both sides.
I think that's a very good point, and I think that would be very helpful. And the Bureau does have a lot of power. The Bureau has the power to actually revoke approvals. I mean, it has the ultimate power.
Yeah.
And so, the question is, has that ever been used? And we've seen some schools that, presumably were pretty bad schools, considering what other people were doing to take action against them. So, is there a reluctance to take that kind of action? Is there, all of these questions? And I agree, having maybe a summary of, this month, how many were, what actions were taken for what kind of behavior. And I know that from what the staff has reported, in the past, maybe if they didn't find student performance fact sheets, it was just a ding. But now that they're looking at it and realizing that's a very serious thing, and they're looking into it in more depth. And I think that, the kind of information about that is helpful to have. But I think that Kate's point is very well taken, and Joe's as well.
Any public comment on this topic? I knew Angela was going to come up. She didn't shake her head when I said public comment.
Again, Angela Perry with TICAS. I would just echo Kate that I thought that was a really great idea, that having that flip side to the complaints and all of the data about the actions that the Bureau is taking in that aspect, it would be great to see that other side of this picture and to have a better sense of all of the actions that the Bureau is taking. I think we all know just how intense the workload is for the Bureau and what a lift everything has been. And so sometimes it is easy to forget that there are so many moving pieces to this. So having that data, I think, would be really helpful. And you know, it would also, it's just a valuable resource to always have data. So I'll echo my earlier point that data is always good. So thank you, that's it.
Any connection?
I lied. One more thing. If there are things or powers or limitations that the Bureau is struggling with, and there are things that advocates could potentially help to try to strengthen Bureau authority, anything that we can do that to be helpful on our side of this picture, we definitely want to be available, and our door is always open, at least mine is. So feel free to reach out. Thank you.
I just wanted to add, I forgot one, when in talking about getting the information out about current actions taken, it would be helpful also to know in connection with that how much it resulted in money back to students, or you know, how the student was affected by that as well.
It'd also be interesting to see how much money is generated from the order of abatement fines that are generated, because it's not student related, but it's fines that schools pay, and I do think it's a valuable conversation to have. So, any other public comment?
I would just like to say, as we leave this topic, is that, you know I've been here a year and some change, and I just want to thank the support of the team that I have at BPPE and the work that you all have done in the last year and some change. We've definitely seen some things change at the Bureau, and we're going in the right direction. And I just want to say thank you to all of you and the advisory committee for supporting me during this process, because it has been a journey.
It's a movement, not a moment, as our friend Lin-Manuel would say. Okay, any other comments on this topic before we move on? Great. Okay, next up is future agenda items. Is there anyone on the panel who has any suggestions for future agenda items that we'd like to discuss in February or whenever? Yeah, exactly. Part of it is done already.
Yeah. The ones we've already talked about, either last meeting or this meeting, that we wanted to have on the agenda, and I think staff is getting together some information for our next meeting on that.
So just to confirm, the two items Mina and I said would be brought to the next meeting, which would include the OSAR duty analysis and the income sharing agreement analysis. In addition, you'd mentioned the internet website disclosure requirements for institutions. That was brought up in discussion. And recently, the case enforcement and prosecution highlights that's a common thing that boards and bureaus report on, is their case prosecution. You know, how many citations, how many disciplinary actions have been conducted. I don't know what time frame you were looking for, but.
And the discussion in connection with that, with
Citations and
well,
fines.
in connection with that, why are we not being out front on this? What do we need to change? What about these possibilities to change? You know, new locations, shifting staff, et cetera. Other suggestions from staff?
All right.
I don't have an item, but I think it'll be helpful to get an idea of the structure of the Bureau, how many people work in the licensing department, how many people work in the complaints, just so that
Like a staffing report?
Yeah. Organizational chart, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Actually, we for a while we were getting the report that as part of the reports, but we haven't gotten that in a while. So it would be good to see what position, how many people, and then how many positions are open, and so we can see where the staffing is. I think that's helpful. Great addition. Mina, do I need to do public comment for the? Oh, I'm sorry, Kevin. Did you have something?
I do, yeah. I think it would be interesting. You know, we're entering into a new year. I would kind of love just maybe some comments from Dr. Marion or from some of the leadership team, kind of on what your 1, 3, 5-year strategic vision looks like for the Bureau. And you know, I know that to an extent, some of that is beyond your span of control, right? But to the extent that it is, if in an ideal world, if you could shape this organization to do what you want, you've got those few big things. We go to the operational level, figure out what the centers of gravity are, and then understand how we move toward that. I think that would be really interesting.
You remember it was just an election, right?
Well, and as part of your sunset review, I'm sure that this is going to be part of your thinking anyway, so it's timely.
I was going to say, it might not be a bad time to talk about it.
The other agenda item we discussed earlier also was, and now I just left my head.
Ponder that, and we can do the dates while you're thinking about it. Oh, public comment, sure. Of course. Mina, all about public comment. We're just going to keep giving you crap about this today. I raise my head, I say public comment, I see Angela shake her head, and I'm like, all right, I guess there's no public comment. Anybody else, public comment about future agenda items, suggestions, anything like that? Okay, did you remember what your question was?
I did, and then it just left me. No, it was having to do with the sampling of complaints that we discussed earlier, and being able to go over that.
I think the chart that we had in January was actually pretty helpful as that sort of summary that we did. So something like that I think would be useful. Kind of broke down sort of a summary of what the student's complaint was, and I think what you're asking for is a little more detail about how that was categorized and resolved, right?
Yeah, I mean, ideally we would have the complaints, as I said, redacted to remove any personal data, and then the analysis of how that was handled. Who was contacted, that kind of thing. Give us a real sense. If you can't do that, then a more detailed summary could work, but I think most helpful would be to see the actual complaint and the actual response.
All right, so the last substantive thing on the agenda is discussing our potential meeting dates for 2019. Michael, you have them in front of you. Want to?
Yes. So as of now, we have 4 dates reserved for meeting dates, and we have February 13th, 2019. We have May 14th, August 14th, and November 13th. Once again, that's February 13th, May 14th, August 14th, and November 13th, 2019. We do have this room reserved at this point. Are there any concerns and/or conflicts?
I have a preference, and that would be for maybe the earliest week in the month rather than the middle of the month. But hey, I can make it work.
Yep. And there has been a little discussion in regards to potentially a Southern California meeting that I will report if we are able to move forward with that.
Oh, you mean to have one of these meetings be in? You should have it in San Diego. Just
phenomenal idea.
Just putting that out there, everybody. So some of us shouldn't have to fly all the time. It's your turn to fly, Margaret. L.A. Pshaw. Okay, so I think that concludes the agenda. Do we need to do another public comment, Nina, before I adjourn? I knew it! Before we adjourn, does anyone have anything else they would like to add? Thank you, Angela, for shaking your head, my visible cue. I think we're good. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Look, 2:13, only 13 minutes past your goal, and had Diana's flight been on time, she would have been on time, too. I make a motion to adjourn, or can I just adjourn? I'm taking control of this and adjourning. Thanks, everybody, and since we won't see you all till February, happy holidays and all that good stuff. Enjoy St. Lucia, for those of us who get to go on vacation between now and then.